Come in. Come in out of whatever the day has been. Set it down, all of it, right there at the door. You don't need to carry it any further tonight. Whatever was heavy, whatever was loud, whatever left its mark on your shoulders and your chest and the quiet space behind your eyes, you can leave it there, just for now, just for this. You are safe here, you are warm, and you are completely comfortable, and nothing from that busy world of yours needs anything from you right now. Nothing at all. Just breathe. Breathe in slowly, and let the out-breath be long and soft and unhurried, like smoke rising from a chimney on a still winter morning, like the last sigh before sleep. There we go. My name is Alan, and I am so glad you're here. Truly, whether you've found this little corner of the world for the very first time tonight, or whether you've been coming back for a while now, and this voice has become something familiar and comfortable to you, I'm glad. I'm glad you're resting. I'm glad you chose, out of everything, to lie down and be still, and let the world go quiet for a little while. That matters more than you might think. Tonight, I'd like to take you somewhere very old, and very gentle, and very warm. I want to take you to England, to the English countryside, to a small village tucked into a shallow valley somewhere in the Midlands, perhaps Warwickshire, perhaps Oxfordshire. The exact parish doesn't quite matter on a winter evening in the 1530s. 5 centuries ago, give or take, a world without electricity, without engines, without the particular kind of noise that fills our modern air. A world that moved at the pace of seasons, of daylight, of the slow turning of a millstone. A world where the most important thing, on a cold winter night, was the fire. Picture it now, if you like. The snow has been falling since early afternoon. Not dramatically, not in great sheets and gusts, but softly, steadily. The kind of snow that falls with patience, that settles onto the world without any urgency at all. It has been covering the lane, slowly, inch by inch. It has been filling the ruts left by the cartwheels. It has been piling itself without fuss along the tops of the low stone walls and on the wooden sills of small, deep-set windows. The village is almost entirely quiet. This is the blue hour, that particular shade of winter dusk, when the sky holds its last pale light and everything on the ground goes still and pewter grey and soft. The elm trees at the edge of the common stand bare and dark against the sky. A crow calls once, from somewhere, and then is silent. The smell in the air is clean and cold and just faintly of wood smoke, that beautiful, unmistakable smell that means people are inside, that means fires are lit, that means the world is attending to itself. You can smell it, can't you? That wood smoke. Just breathe it in. Along the lane, a single muddy track that runs through the heart of the village, like a slowly exhaled breath. The cottages sit low and dark and solid. They are timber-framed, most of them, the wooden beams dark with age, the spaces between them filled with wattle and daub, a mixture of woven sticks and clay and straw and horsehair, and who knows what else. Plastered smooth and whitewashed in warmer seasons, now gone a little grey with the cold and damp of December. The thatched roofs are thick with snow. Each roofline is rounded and soft and white, like something out of a dream. And from each chimney, the simple, functional chimneys of ordinary Tudor homes, nothing grand about them at all. Thin ribbons of smoke rise into the still air, rise and soften and dissolve, rise and soften and dissolve. Somebody, in every one of these small homes, has kept the fire going. That is no small thing. In this world, the fire is everything. We'll come to understand that tonight, in ways that I think will stay with you. But for now, just stand here for a moment in the lane. Let the cold air touch your cheeks. Let the snow settle, very gently, on your shoulders. Let your eyes move from rooftop to rooftop, chimney to chimney, warm-lit window to warm-lit window. You are perfectly safe, my friend. This all happened so very, very long ago. This village, these people, this particular quiet evening, they exist now only in imagination and in history, and both of those places are gentle. Both of those places will hold you kindly tonight. Just let the cold and the blue light and the soft, steady snow work on you for a moment. And then, come with me inside. There is a path. You can just make it out beneath the snow, a slight depression in the white, a suggestion of where feet have walked, day after day, season after season, until the ground itself remembers the way. It leads from the lane, through a low wooden gate that hangs a little crooked on its iron hinge, across a small yard where a few hens have long since tucked themselves away for the night, and up to a door. The door is low. You would need to dip your head. It is made of thick oak planks, darkened almost to black with age and weather, and it is held together with wide, hand-forged iron straps that somebody hammered out at a forge, probably in this very village, probably decades before this particular evening. There is no number on the door, there is no letterbox. There is a simple iron latch, worn smooth from 10,000 lifts of a thumb. Reach out and lift it. Feel the cold of the metal. Feel the solid resistance of the door. And then the way it swings inward, slightly stiff, slightly swollen with winter damp, and then, all at once, the warmth finds you. It comes out to meet you like a living thing. A soft, enveloping rush of heated air carrying everything it has passed through on its way to the door. Wood smoke and beeswax, and something savoury and slow-cooked. Something herby and starchy and deeply nourishing. There is beneath it all a faint animal warmth, a breath of rushes and tallow and old wool, and the particular sweetness of dried lavender hung in bundles from the rafters last summer, and not yet entirely spent. You step inside. The room is low and firelit and absolutely, deeply real. This is the hall which, in a cottage of this size, means simply the main room, the only room of any substance, the room where almost all of life happens. The ceiling, if you can call it that, is really just the underside of the floor above, where the sleeping loft sits rough-hewn beams, crossing the space with a kind of unplanned beauty, darkened by years of smoke. The walls are close. The space is small by any modern standard, and yet it does not feel small. It feels held. The hearth burns at the centre of it all, or nearly the centre, set into one wall, the fireplace not yet the grand architectural statement it will become in later centuries, but a deep, functional, generous opening of stone and iron, with a mantel shelf above, and iron dogs holding the logs apart to let the air feed the flame. The fire is well made and confident. It throws warm light across the flagstone floor, across the rough plaster walls, across the simple wooden furniture, a table, 2 benches, a heavy chair near the fire, a low stool, on the floor rushes, fresh ones laid not too long ago, smelling faintly of the meadow even now. And there, by the fire, moving with the unhurried ease of someone entirely at home, is here, our good wife. She hasn't heard you come in yet, or perhaps she has, and she simply isn't startled. Nothing startles her tonight. Tonight, she is exactly where she belongs. Let's stay a while. Let's watch and listen and rest. You're warm now. You're inside. But let us go back. Let us go back a little further into this day, back to its very beginning, back to the dark and the cold of the early morning hours, when the village was still entirely asleep, and the snow had not yet begun to fall, and the whole world was simply black and silent and waiting. Because to understand this evening, this warmth, this golden firelit room, you have to understand the morning. You have to understand what it took to get here. You have to understand the fire. It is somewhere between 4 and 5 in the morning. There are no clocks in this cottage. Not in the way we mean. There is no ticking, no glowing dial, no soft chime. Time, in this world, is felt rather than measured in the depth of the darkness, in the quality of the silence, in the particular cold that settles into the stones of the floor in the small hours before dawn, and makes itself known through the soles of the feet. She knows this cold. She has known it all her life. She was born into it, and she married into it, and it has never frightened her. It is simply the cold that comes before the warmth. It is simply the dark that comes before the fire. She is awake. She doesn't rise dramatically. There is no sudden sitting up, no startled waking. She simply opens her eyes, lies still for a breath or two, feels the weight of the rough wool blanket over her shoulders, the warmth of her husband's back against hers, the particular close-smelling darkness of the sleeping loft with its low slant of roof just above her face. She listens. The village is utterly still, no wind, no movement, nothing but the faint, almost imagined sound of snow falling, which is not really a sound at all, of course, but a kind of deepened silence, a silence with texture to it, as though the world has wrapped itself in something soft, and beneath that something else, the faint, intimate breathing of the fire below, because the fire is never completely out, not in a well-run household, not in the deep of winter. One of the most important skills in this world, one of the arts that gets passed from mother to daughter and grandmother to granddaughter without much ceremony, without anyone calling it wisdom, though it is the art of banking a fire, of laying it down for the night so that it will last, so that somewhere beneath the ash, through all the dark hours, a cluster of embers will hold their heat like a secret, like a small kept promise, like a heartbeat that refuses to stop. She banked it herself last night. She always does. There is a particular way of doing it. You let the fire burn down in the evening, not out, never entirely out, just down until the great logs have become glowing coals, and the coals have begun to grey at their edges, and the heat is deep and steady rather than bright. Then you rake the coals together into a compact mound at the centre of the hearth. Then you cover them. In this household, as in many others, this means a clay curfew from the French couvre-feu. Cover the fire, a curved dome of baked clay, like a small terracotta shell, placed over the banked coals to protect them through the night, to keep the air from them just enough, to let them breathe just barely enough, to hold them in that careful state between burning and cold. In the morning, if you have done it right, if the curfew was placed just so, if the coals were the right depth and the right temperature when you covered them, you will lift the curfew and find heat. Living, breathing, generous heat, enough to start the morning from. She sits up, slowly, swings her legs over the edge of the bed, a simple wooden frame with a rope-sprung base, a straw-filled mattress, a bolster of rough linen. The cold of the air hits her arms and face immediately. December cold, indoor cold, the kind that makes you want to simply reverse and pull the blanket back over your head and stay there until March. She does not reverse. She never has. She wraps a shawl around her shoulders, thick wool, a little scratchy, deeply familiar, and she moves to the ladder. The ladder is steep enough that she comes down it the way one comes down a ship's ladder, face in, hands gripping the sides. 7 rungs. She has counted them so many times in the dark that counting them is no longer something that happens in the mind, it happens in the body, in the knees, in the palms of the hands. 7. And then the flagstones under her bare feet. Cold, cold as river water, cold as January, cold as the dark side of a stone wall. She breathes in sharply just once, and then steadies, stands still, lets her feet adjust, lets the cold become simply the floor, simply the morning, simply the first sensation of the day rather than an assault. This is who she is. This is what I find so quietly extraordinary about her, and about the thousands upon thousands of women just like her across Tudor England in this particular season, in every village, in every small town, in every farmhouse and cottage and husbandman's dwelling, from Cornwall to Cumberland, every single morning, before the light, before the warmth, before any comfort at all, they were here, standing on cold stone, reaching for the fire. You're safe here, resting in this soft, warm imagining of the past. That world is 500 years gone. Let it drift past you like a dream, like smoke from an old chimney, like snow that has long since melted into the earth. You are warm, you are still. Just breathe along with her for a little while. She crosses to the hearth, kneels down before it not dramatically, not in any ceremonial way, just practically, efficiently, the kneel of someone who has knelt here 1,000 mornings before. The flagstone before the hearth is slightly worn, slightly warmer than the rest from years of radiated heat, and even now, even cold and dark as the room is, the hearthstone has a residual warmth to it, just a whisper of it, just enough. She reaches for the curfew, lifts it, and there they are, the coals, glowing softly, orange-red and alive, nested in their bed of grey ash, breathing their slow, patient breath, having held their warmth through 7 or 8 hours of cold darkness, with nothing but their own nature and a clay dome to help them. She looks at them for a moment. There is something she feels in this moment that I don't think she would have words for, not because she is inarticulate, but because some feelings live below language, below even thought, in the place where the body simply knows. Gratitude, perhaps. Recognition. The quiet satisfaction of a thing done right, and having it hold. Good morning, she might think, without thinking it in words. Good morning, Coles. You made it. She reaches for the small iron poker, its handle wrapped with a strip of leather, worn thin and dark with use, and she stirs the coals gently. Not too hard, just enough to let the air in, to wake them, to remind them of what they are. The glow brightens immediately. A thread of smoke rises. She stirs again, just once more, and then sets the poker aside and reaches for the wood. The wood is kept just beside the hearth, a small stack of it, brought in yesterday evening before the snow began, dry and split and ready. Oak, mostly, for the long burn. Some ash, which burns even green and is therefore a kind of insurance, a kindness, a handful of smaller sticks for the first catching. She takes the small sticks first, lays them across the coals in a loose arrangement, not too tight, never too tight. You must let the air move through and watches. Watches. There is a particular patience required in this moment. The sticks sit on the coals, and for several seconds they simply sit there, darkening slightly, beginning to warm, and then, so gradually, it is hard to say exactly when it happens, a thin curl of smoke rises from one of them, and then another, and then a tiny tentative flame no bigger than a thumbnail flickers at the edge of the lowest stick. She does not move, does not breathe too heavily toward it, does not crowd it. She simply watches and lets it find itself. The flame grows, catches the next stick, brightens, becomes 2 flames, then 3, then something that is simply fire actual, committed, morning fire, and she sits back on her heels and lets out a slow breath, and the warmth, small and young as it still is, touches her face for the first time today. What strikes me most about this moment is how she is not performing it for anyone. There is no audience for the morning fire. No one watching, no one appreciating, no record being kept. It is purely functional, purely necessary, and yet there is something beautiful in its necessity, something that feels to me, across all these centuries, deeply and quietly sacred. In Tudor England, fire was not a convenience. It was life. It provided warmth, yes, but also light. It cooked all the food. It dried the wet clothes. It kept the winter from entering the bones. To tend the fire was to tend the household. To keep the fire was to keep the family. She adds larger pieces of wood now. 2 of the split oak pieces, set carefully, their flat faces toward the centre, the gap between them just right. She sets a third across them at an angle, adjusts it once, slightly, with her bare hand the wood not yet hot enough to burn her until she is satisfied. Then she sits back and looks at it. The fire, her fire. The room, which was dark as deep water when she came down those 7 rungs, is now beginning to fill with moving light. The shadows shift and lean and reach along the walls. The rough plaster catches the amber and becomes something almost beautiful, textured and warm and alive. The iron pot hanging from its hook above the fire begins to feel the heat. The rushes on the floor, which were simply dark and indefinite before, are now visible, pale and dry, and faintly sweet-smelling. Morning has begun. The village outside is still dark, still silent, still deep in its pre-dawn sleep. The snow is just beginning to fall, she doesn't know that yet. But in this cottage, in this room, because of what her hands did this morning, because of what they do every morning, what thousands of hands like hers are doing right now across the length and breadth of this cold country, there is light, there is warmth, there is a day beginning, and soon, very soon, there will be bread. But fire alone cannot make a morning. Fire is the heart of it. Yes, the first thing, the necessary thing, but a household runs on more than warmth. It runs on water. It always has, it always will. And in this village, on this particular snow-beginning morning in the deep of December, water does not come from a tap. It does not arrive with any ease or convenience. It must be fetched. She knows this. She has always known this. She pulls on her outer kirtle a long, full-skirted overdress of undyed wool, rough to the touch, thick enough to matter, and laces it at the front with practiced fingers that barely need to look at what they're doing. Then her apron, tied at the back. Then her coif, a fitted linen cap that covers her hair and ears and ties beneath her chin, and over that, her hood, a heavy wool hood in dark russet, almost brown, that drapes over her shoulders like a cape and tucks in at the front. She picks up the bucket. It is a simple wooden bucket, staved oak, iron-banded, with a rope handle that has been spliced and re-spliced in 2 places and is beginning to need attention again. It holds perhaps 2 gallons when full. It is not heavy empty. It will be heavy full. She lifts the latch and steps outside. The cold hits her like a wall. Not aggressive cold, not the kind that shocks and panics, but the deep, settled cold of a morning that has been cold all night and intends to stay that way. Cold that has seeped into the wood of the doorframe and the stone of the step and the very air itself, right down to its bones. She can see her breath immediately, a soft white cloud that forms and dissolves and forms again with each exhale. She pauses for just a moment on the step, adjusting. The snow is falling. She notices it the way you notice something you half expected, with a kind of recognition rather than surprise. Of course, she looks up at the sky for a moment, which is still dark but has that particular pre-dawn quality to it, that faint oyster-grey luminescence that comes not from the sun, which is still well below the horizon, but from the snow itself, which reflects back every particle of ambient light. The snowflakes are small and steady and purposeful. They land on her hood, on her shoulders, on the back of her hand where it grips the rope handle of the bucket. She starts down the lane. The snow is perhaps an inch deep already, and beneath it the lane is frozen, not ice exactly, but the particular hard, uneven frieze of mud that has been churned by cartwheels and horse hooves and many feet, and then caught by the frost before it could settle smooth. She has to watch her step. She knows where the worst ruts are, the places where the mud froze at an angle, the places where water gathered in low spots and turned to ice beneath the snow overnight. She navigates them without thinking much about it. Her feet know this lane. The well is at the centre of the village. In this village, as in most English villages of this era, the well is more than just infrastructure. It is, in a quiet way, a social institution. It is where people meet every single morning without having arranged to do so, where news moves, where the texture of communal life gets its first few threads of the day woven into it. Everyone needs water. Everyone comes to the well. And so the well becomes, almost by accident, the first gathering place of every day. She is not the first one there this morning. Even in this early dark, in the falling snow, she can hear the creak and splash before she rounds the corner of the church wall and comes into the small open space where the well stands. And their shapes in the darkness, faces turning toward her, breath clouds mixing in the cold air. The blacksmith's wife, Margaret, a sturdy, broad-shouldered woman with a very direct gaze and a reputation for knowing everything about everyone, delivered always with more warmth than malice. She has already filled 1 bucket and is working on a second, cranking the handle of the windlass with the easy authority of someone who has done this 10,000 mornings. And old Thomas, The widower from the end of the lane, a man of perhaps 60, which in this world is genuinely old, though he carries it in his body rather than his face, bent forward slightly as he carries his bucket in both hands, the way the elderly do when they are being careful and don't want to admit it. "Good morrow," they say. Good morrow. Nothing more dramatic than that. No embraces, no particular warmth of greeting. It is too cold and too early for performance. Just that simple, ancient phrase, which means roughly what good morning means to us, except that it comes from a world where morning was something you genuinely had to work for. Good morrow. Here we are again. We made it through another night. Good. She takes her turn at the windlass. The well is perhaps 20 feet deep, dug by hand, at some point in the village's past, by people whose names no one now living can remember. The windlass is a simple wooden roller set on a frame above the opening, with an iron handle for cranking and a rope wound around it, and at the rope's end, a wooden bucket, different from her carrying bucket, a permanent fixture, darker and more waterlogged, that lives its whole life descending and ascending this stone shaft. She cranks the handle, the rope unwinds, the well bucket drops. She hears it hit the water, a hollow, resonant splash far below, that particular sound of cold water in a stone space, intimate and deep and very old. She waits a moment, lets it sink and fill, then she begins to crank it back up. Here is something I find quietly remarkable, and I want to stay with it for just a moment. This well, this particular well, in this particular village, has been serving this community for generations. The people who dug it are long dead. Their grandchildren's grandchildren are the ones standing here now in the snow, and the water that is rising up through this shaft right now, on this December morning in the 1530s, has been moving through the chalk and limestone beneath this valley since long before any of them were born. Rainwater, mostly, from seasons past, filtered through the earth, cold and clean, and carrying within it something of every autumn and every spring that has soaked it down through the ground. Nothing from this world can reach you now wherever you are listening from. You are warm and still and resting, and this old December morning is nothing but a story, a dream of a world that was, and a beautiful one. Just let it move through you, slowly, like water through chalk, like the quiet seep of old light. Let it settle. She cranks the last few turns. The well bucket rises above the stone lip of the well, streaming water from its base, dark and cold and full. She grips it with both hands. The cold of the water is immediate and sharp through the wood and tilts it, so that the water pours in a glittering arc into her carrying bucket. She does this twice. 2 full lifts of the well bucket to fill her carrying bucket, and the second time she does it, she feels the cold of the water through the rope and the handle, and even through the thick wool of her mittens, which are already damp, cold hands. This is the morning tax. This is what the day asks of you, before it gives you anything else. She pays it without complaint. She says something to Margaret, a few words about the snow, about whether it will hold all day, a brief exchange about one of Margaret's children who has had a cough. Margaret says he is better. Thanks be to God. She says she is glad of it. Old Thomas has already shuffled away with his bucket, moving slowly down the lane toward his door. Then she lifts her bucket, 2 gallons of December well water, just above freezing, heavy as earth, sloshing gently against the oak staves. She wraps both hands around the rope handle, lifts with her knees the way a body learns to do through sheer repetition, and begins the walk back. She goes carefully on the ice. She watches her feet. The snow is coming down a little harder now. She can feel it settling on the back of her hood, feel the faint cold weight of it accumulating on her shoulders. The bucket sways slightly with each step, and she compensates for it automatically, shifting her weight in the opposite direction, keeping the water from sloshing over the rim, because every drop that sloshes over the rim is a drop she has to go back and fetch. She doesn't spill a drop. What stays with me, thinking about this walk, this particular, unremarkable, utterly ordinary walk that she has made every morning for years and will make every morning for years more, is the sheer, unacknowledged physical competence of it, the strength in her hands, the balance in her hips, the easy, efficient way her body does the work of living in this world. We would call her tough, perhaps. She would simply call it Tuesday. Or rather, she wouldn't call it anything at all. It doesn't occur to her to be proud of it any more than we are proud of breathing. This is just what mornings are. She turns in at the crooked gate, crosses the small yard head down now, watching the frozen ground, feeling the particular effort of carrying something heavy over uneven terrain, the way the load tries to pull at the shoulders, tries to tip the spine. She adjusts, she compensates, she makes it to the door, lifts the latch with her elbow, since both hands are full, steps back into the warmth. It is even more striking the second time the wall of warm air after the cold, the way the smell of the fire and the morning and the waking house reaches out to her as she comes in. She sets the bucket down just inside the door with a satisfying solid thunk of wood on flagstone, and she straightens up and rolls her shoulders back and takes a long breath. The fire is burning well now. She can see that immediately, even in the few minutes she was gone, it has established itself, found its rhythm for the morning, settled into its work, the iron pot above it empty still, but warming is beginning to tick faintly as the metal expands. She takes off her wet mittens, hangs them near the fire to dry, looks at the bucket of water, looks at the fire. Good, she thinks, in that wordless way of hers. Everything is in its place. Now there can be bread. There is a reason bread is called the staff of life. Not the decoration of life, not the comfort of life, though it is certainly that too, but the staff, the thing you lean on, the thing that holds you upright. In this village, in this century, bread is not a side note to the meal. It is not something you buy wrapped and sliced and take for granted. It is the meal, or the greater part of it. It is the foundation on which the day is built, and really making it, from the grain that was ground at the mill last week to the warm loaf that comes out of the heat this afternoon, is not a quick task. It is not a simple task. It is an all-day task. It is, in its own quiet way, an act of devotion. She begins with the flour. It is stored in a wooden chest near the far wall, a flour ark, the old name for it, which I find rather beautiful, ark, as though the flour itself is something worth protecting from the flood, something precious enough to build a vessel for. And in truth, in this world, it is. The flour in that chest represents labour, the labour of sowing and tending and harvesting the grain through the long months of the year, the labour of hauling it to the mill and waiting for the miller and hauling it back. Flour is not bought casually. It is not wasted. Every cup of it has a history. She lifts the lid of the ark. The smell that rises is one of those smells that lives deeper in the memory than most dry and starchy and slightly nutty, with a faint mustiness that isn't unpleasant, just honest. This is not white flour. Not the fine, pale, sifted flour that wealthy households in Tudor cities might use for their manchet bread, the small, refined loaves of the gentry, pale as ivory and close crumbed. This is Maslin flour. A mixture, roughly 2 parts rye to 1 part wheat, milled coarse enough that you can feel the individual particles of bran between your fingers when you rub a pinch of it together. She scoops several large handfuls into her wooden kneading trough. The kneading trough is one of the most important objects in this household. It is perhaps 3 feet long and 1.5 feet wide, carved from a single piece of elm and worn smooth on the inside from years of use. It sits on 2 low legs that bring it to just the right working height, hip height, or nearly so. The wood has absorbed so much flour and water and warmth over the years that it has its own pale, floury ghost of a patina, and the grain of the elm makes a soft, flowing pattern across the inside of the bowl that is genuinely beautiful if you think to look at it. She rarely thinks to look at it. She just uses it. She adds the water now, the well water she fetched this morning, transferred into a clay pitcher and set near the fire to take off the worst of the cold. Not warm exactly, barely lukewarm, but not ice-cold either, because ice-cold water will not encourage the leaven to do its work, and the leaven is everything. The leaven, This is the heart of it, the secret within the bread. Not yeast from a packet that is centuries away from being a concept. This is the old wild leaven, the sourdough starter that she keeps in a covered pot on the shelf above the hearth, and which has been alive, actually, genuinely alive, a tiny living culture of wild yeasts and bacteria for longer than she has been married. Her mother gave it to her, or rather, gave her a piece of it, a cup of the sponge from her own pot, as part of the business of setting up a new household. Her mother's culture has been going since before she was born. You could trace it back through the generations, not that anyone would think to, not that anyone would call it remarkable, this continuous, living thread of fermentation passing from mother to daughter, older than anyone can quite say. She tips the leaven into the flour and water. It slides out of its pot in a thick, slightly bubbly mass cream-coloured, with a sharp, pleasant sour tang to it that hits the nose immediately. She can smell the life in it. She stirs it into the flour and water with a wooden spoon, working in wide circles at first, then tighter ones as the mixture thickens and begins to resist. Then she sets the spoon aside, and she uses her hands. This is the part that no tool can replace. The hands. She plunges both into the dough, which is shaggy and rough and sticky at this point. Nothing yet like the smooth, elastic thing it will eventually become, and she begins to work it, pushing with the heel of her hand, folding the dough back over itself, turning the trough a quarter turn, pushing again. The motion is rhythmic and full-bodied, using not just the hands but the arms, the shoulders, the core, a rocking, pressing, folding rhythm that has its own momentum, its own pace. She has done this so many times that her body knows the rhythm independently of her mind. Her mind, in fact, is elsewhere, or rather, it is nowhere in particular, which is its own kind of rest. The kneading of bread is one of those physical tasks that occupies the body completely enough that the mind simply releases, floats free. She is thinking, in the loosest sense of the word, about nothing much. The snow outside, whether her husband's boots are dry enough for today's work, whether old Agnes from the widow's cottage will come by this evening as she sometimes does in winter, just for company, just for the fire. Just breathe wherever you are listening from. Let that steady rhythm reach you. Push and fold the quiet working of two hands in dough on a cold winter morning. 5 centuries past, warm and purposeful and unhurried. You're perfectly safe. This is a world without urgency. At least in this room, on this morning, just let yourself be carried along on that slow domestic tide. The dough is changing under her hands. This is the part that always feels, to me, faintly miraculous, though she would not use that word, would perhaps use a quieter word, a more practical word, a word closer to simply right. The dough, which began as a shaggy, barely cohesive mass, is becoming something else. The proteins in the flour are linking together under the pressure of her hands, forming long elastic strands gluten, though she has no name for it that give the dough its stretch, its resilience. When she takes a handful and gently pulls it, it stretches rather than tears. It has acquired something like life, something like suppleness. She folds it once more, shapes it into a rough mound, dusts it lightly with flour from the ark, then she covers it. A piece of linen cloth, slightly damp, laid over the top of the trough to keep the surface from drying out, and then she leaves it. This is the hardest part of bread in a way. The waiting. The dough will sit here, near the fire but not too close, for several hours. The leaven inside it will begin to do its ancient, slow work consuming the sugars in the flour, breathing out gas, making the dough expand and bubble and swell almost imperceptibly until it has roughly doubled in size. This will take most of the morning. There is nothing she can do to hurry it. She could put it closer to the fire, but she has learned her mother taught her, and her body confirmed it that too much heat makes the leaven work too fast and produces bread with a sharp, slightly bitter taste. Too little heat and the dough simply sits, sullen and cold, going nowhere. It has to be just right. She knows just right. She has calibrated the distance from the fire to the trough by feel, by experience, by a knowledge that lives in her hands rather than her head. She adjusts the trough 6 inches further from the hearth, no more, and nods to herself. She will come back to it. She has other things to do now, but bread has been set in motion, and in this household, in this winter that matters enormously, the village around her, the miller's wife, the blacksmith's household, the priest's housekeeper, the yeoman farmer's wife, each of them has their own trough, their own leaven, their own morning rhythm of flour and water and waiting. Across the whole village, at this early hour, bread is rising. Dozens of quiet little doughs in dozens of cold-started homes, all tended by hands that know what they're doing, all slowly, imperceptibly swelling toward their afternoon. What moves me about this, and I want to be honest about this, because I think it's worth stopping for a moment, is the patience in it. We live now in a world that is so allergic to waiting, where 2-minute things feel slow, where we fill every pause with noise, every gap with input. And here she is, here they all are, building their day around a process that cannot be hurried. That will take as long as it takes. That asks nothing of you but to trust it and leave it alone and come back when it's time. There is a kind of freedom in that, I think, a kind of rest. She wipes her floury hands on her apron, looks at the covered trough with a calm assessment of someone who has done their part and knows it. Then she turns back to the fire and the morning and the long, warm, slow-turning day still ahead. By early afternoon, the dough will have risen. She will uncover it then, punch it down one firm, satisfying push of the fist into the centre, the dough exhaling softly, and shape it into loaves. Round, flattish loaves, not yet baked in a dedicated bread oven because not every cottage has one. She will either carry her loaves to the communal bake oven near the church where the village baker tends the fire, and every household pays their portion in kind, or in coin, for the use of the great stone oven, or she will bake them here, on the hearthstone itself, propped against the back of the fire under an overturned pot to trap the heat. Either way, by late afternoon the cottage will fill with a smell, the smell of bread baking. That particular, extraordinary, ancient smell, warm and yeasty and sweet and slightly caramelized at the crust, that is one of the most continuous threads running through all of human history. People have been baking bread and smelling it bake for 12,000 years or more. Every era, every culture, every corner of the world that grows grain knows that smell. It is possibly the most companionable smell in the world. It is already, in some sense, on its way, already beginning, in the slow chemistry of the leaven, in the warmth of the hearth, in the patience of the dough. And from that bread, from those quiet, round, rough-crumbed loaves, will come tonight's supper. Bread torn and shared at the table, passed between hands, eaten with pottage and whatever else the evening brings. But that is hours away yet. For now, just the dough, breathing softly under its linen cloth, just the fire, just the snow, falling still outside. If the fire is the heart of this cottage, and the bread is its patience, then the pottage pot is its generosity. It is always there. That is the thing about the pottage pot. The iron pot hanging from its hook on the chimney crane above the hearth, black with age and seasoned with years of use, until its inside surface has become almost glassy, almost non-stick in its own ancient way. It is always there, and something is almost always in it. Not necessarily the same thing from one day to the next, not necessarily anything elaborate or planned, but something, a basis, a beginning. The pot is the household's most patient collaborator, its most reliable presence, the thing that simply gets on with it quietly while everything else in the day happens around it. She turns to it now. The fire has settled into its morning rhythm, steady, generous, not roaring but reliable. The kind of fire that will hold all day with occasional tending. The iron pot has been hanging over it long enough to have lost its overnight chill, and when she reaches up and touches its side carefully, with the back of her hand, the way you test the temperature of something you are not entirely sure of, she can feel the warmth radiating through the metal. Not hot yet, just warm. Asking. She begins with the water. She ladles several scoops from the bucket she brought from the well into the pot, a deep, ringing sound. As the water hits the iron, a small cloud of steam where it touches the warming surface. She does this unhurriedly, 3 ladlefuls, 4, until the pot holds enough water to be a proper basis for the morning's pottage. Then the peas. Dried peas, stored in a cloth sack hanging from a rafter hook out of reach of mice, grey-green and hard and small, the colour of the field in winter, rattling dryly against each other as she pours a generous handful into her palm and considers them. These peas were grown in her own garden plot through the summer, dried in the late August sun on the vine, shelled and stored in September, with the particular satisfaction of someone putting away for winter, something that the winter will need. She tips them into the pot. They sink through the water and settle at the bottom with a series of small, individual plunks. Oats next. A wooden scoop of oats from the sack by the flour ark, thick, rough-cut oats. Not the fine rolled kind. Oats that will take time to soften and swell and give up their starch to the water and thicken the whole thing into something with body and substance. She pours them in, watches them float for a moment on the surface before beginning to absorb water and settle. And then the leeks. She brought them in from the garden yesterday, a small bundle of them, stored under straw in a corner of the yard against the frost, and they have been sitting in a clay crock near the door since then. She takes 2, brushes the soil from their roots with her fingers, and begins to slice them on the small wooden board she keeps for this purpose. The leek releases its smell immediately as the blade goes through it, sharp and green and slightly sweet, filling the air around her with something that smells of both garden and kitchen at once. She has a knife that she is very particular about. It is not a large knife. It is a small handled blade of iron, its edge kept keen by regular work with a whetstone, the handle wrapped with a strip of leather that has been replaced twice in her married life. It was her mother's before hers, and before that she doesn't know whose. It is simply the knife, the one that lives on the shelf above the workbench and comes down every morning and goes back up every evening, the one that has sliced leeks and onions and turnips and the occasional piece of salt meat on this board for longer than she can account for. She slices the leeks in thin rounds, the pale green circles falling away from the blade and settling onto the board in a loose, fragrant pile. You're warm and perfectly comfortable, wherever you are resting tonight. Let this old kitchen come to you softly, in layers the smell of leeks, the sound of the knife on wood, the quiet hiss of the fire, the steady, patient presence of the pot warming over the flame. This is a world that moves slowly, and it will not rush you. Just breathe in with it. Just let the morning move at its own pace. She tips the leeks into the pot. They hiss softly against the warming water, a good sound, a welcoming sound, the sound of things beginning to become something together. She wipes the board with the edge of her apron, replaces the knife on the shelf, and then stands for a moment looking at the pot with the expression of someone who is not quite finished deciding. Something else. She goes to the shelf above the hearth, a rough plank set into the wall, lined with the small collection of things that give this kitchen its particular character. There is a clay salt pig, stoppered with a wooden lid, containing the grey-brown sea salt that she uses with great care because it is not free and not plentiful. There is a small bunch of dried thyme, tied with a piece of thread, hanging from a nail, dark green turning to grey, its smell concentrated and woody and ancient. There is a bunch of dried sage, a handful of dried parsley, small, modest things, nothing exotic, nothing that has travelled more than perhaps 30 miles to get here. She takes the time, crumbles a little of it between her fingers, the dry leaves releasing their oil in a sharp, herby burst, and lets the fragments fall into the pot. Then a pinch of salt from the salt pig. She replaces the stopper carefully, returns the pig to its spot. A piece of dried pork now, if there is one. She checks the small barrel near the back wall, the salting barrel, where pieces of pork have been sitting in brine since autumn, when the pig was killed. November was slaughter time in this world. Every household that kept a pig, and most did, a single pig fed through the summer on scraps and windfall apples and whatever it could find, killed it in November, when the cold was reliable enough to help preserve the meat and the animal had fattened through the autumn on fallen mast. The pig was the insurance policy. The pig was November's gift to December, January, February, and beyond. She finds a piece, a small one, not large, just enough to lend the pottage something of the depth and richness that only meat can give. She rinses it under a little of the well water to take off some of the excess salt, and drops it into the pot. There. Now the pot has everything it needs. The peas, the oats, the leeks, the thyme and salt, the piece of pork, all of it sitting in the cold water, just beginning to warm, just beginning the long process of becoming together what none of them could be separately becoming. Over the next several hours, pottage, which is a word that comes from the old French pottage, meaning simply what comes from the pot. And what comes from this pot, by midday, will be thick and steaming and savoury and deeply, genuinely nourishing in the way that only long-cooked food can be the way. That food which has had time becomes something more than the sum of its ingredients. She adjusts the height of the pot on its hook. The chimney crane allows for this, swinging the pot closer to or further from the flame, and then does what the bread has already taught her to do this morning. She steps back. She leaves it. Because pottage, like bread, like all the best things in this kitchen, cannot be hurried. It must be allowed to work through its own process on its own time. The water must come slowly to heat. The peas must soften slowly, cell by cell, giving up their starchiness to the broth. The oats must swell and release and dissolve into something silky. The pork must give up its salt and its fat and its flavour, slowly, over hours, enriching everything around it. She will stir it occasionally through the morning. She will add a little water if it thickens too much. She will taste it once, around midday, with a wooden spoon, and add a little more salt, and perhaps a few more dried herbs, and then leave it again. She will not be anxious about it. She has no reason to be anxious about it. This moves me, when I sit with it, this profound lack of food anxiety in her morning, not complacency, not carelessness, but the deep settled confidence of someone who knows how to feed herself and her household from what is available, what is stored, what grows near. She is not wondering what to have for dinner. She is not scrolling through options or worrying about whether it will be good enough or different enough or interesting enough. She knows what there is. She knows how to make it well, and making it well, in this world, is one of the central skills of being a person, one of the most important things you can do with a day. There is something restful in that certainty, something I think we quietly miss. Just let that old world drift past you while you rest. The pot is on, the fire is holding, the bread is rising under its cloth. Outside, the snow is falling steadily now, and the village is beginning to stir dogs barking somewhere. The distant clang of the blacksmith beginning his morning work, a child's voice raised briefly and then hushed. But in here, in this low, warm room with its smell of leek and thyme and wood smoke and cold stone, warming slowly, there is only the fire and the pot and the patient chemistry of a meal in progress. She wipes her hands, looks once at the pot. The water is just beginning to show the first faint stirring of heat. Tiny bubbles forming on the peas where they rest against the iron. Not boiling yet, not even close. Just warming, just beginning, and she nods. Good. She will be back. But now there is wool to card, and her neighbour's knock is expected sometime after the church bell for terce the mid-morning prayer bell. The village's rough clock in the morning is moving in its slow, rich way toward all the rest of the day. The pot will manage. The pot always manages. There is a basket in the corner. It has been there all morning, sitting just beyond the reach of the firelight, patient as everything else in this room seems to be patient, waiting its turn, waiting for the bread to be mixed, and the pot to be set, and the morning's first necessities to be attended to before it gets to make its claim on her hands. It is a wide, shallow basket woven from split willow, and it is full of wool, not yarn, not cloth, wool in its most raw and recent state, fleece, or near enough. These are rolags and locks of fleece that have been washed, skirted, and scoured in hot water back in the autumn, when the smell of wet wool was everywhere in the village, and dried, and stored, and are now waiting to become something useful. They are cream-coloured, most of them, the natural colour of the sheep that grew them, with here and there a lock of a darker brown from one of the brown-faced animals. They still hold a faint, particular smell not unpleasant, not to anyone who has grown up with it, the lanolin smell of sheep, warm and slightly fatty and deeply animal. She pulls the basket into the firelight, sits down on her low stool, the three-legged stool that is her particular seat by the fire, worn smooth on the seat, to the exact shape of where she sits, in the way that only years of sitting in exactly the same place can do. She settles herself, stretches her feet toward the warmth, and reaches into the basket for the handcards. The handcards are simple tools and beautiful in their simplicity. 2 flat wooden paddles, each about the size of a large hand, backed with leather set with rows of fine iron teeth, small, closely spaced, slightly bent at the tips like a field of tiny commas. They have handles. Hers are worn smooth at the grip and darkened with the oil of many hands her own, and before hers, her mother's again, because tools in this world are not disposable. They are maintained and mended and passed on. Her handcards will outlast her, in all likelihood, and be used by someone after. She takes a lock of fleece in her left hand, draws it across the teeth of the left-hand card in a single, smooth stroke, pressing the fleece lightly against the teeth so that it catches and spreads, pulls apart into individual fibres, begins to open up and become something less matted and more airy. Then she takes the right-hand card and draws it across the left, gently, in the opposite direction, the 2 sets of teeth working against each other and between them drawing the fibres out longer and more parallel and more orderly. Back and forth, back and forth. The motion is quiet and rhythmic and deeply satisfying, in a way that is very hard to articulate, but very easy to feel. If you have ever done any repetitive handwork, any knitting or sorting or folding or polishing, you will know something of it. The way the hands find a rhythm and the mind releases its grip on itself. The way the body settles into the work and the work settles into the body, and suddenly there is just motion. Just the texture of the fleece under the fingers, the slight resistance of the teeth, the soft sound of fibre against iron. Back and forth, back and forth. What stays with me about this particular morning task is how much of Tudor life, especially the life of women in the village, was organised around exactly this quality of work. Repetitive, skilled, productive, and quiet enough to allow conversation. The great spinning rooms of Tudor England, the informal gatherings of women with their distaffs and handcards and spindles by the fire, these were not just economic operations. They were social ones, emotional ones. The work gave the hands something to do while the voice and the heart did other things entirely. She doesn't have to wait long. There is a knock at the door. 3 firm raps. The particular knock of someone who is expected, and she calls out without rising. Come in, come in. And the door opens on a rush of cold air, and a figure that steps through it with the particular energy of someone who has been cold and is very glad to be arriving somewhere warm. It is Marjorie. Marjorie is her nearest neighbour, the wife of a yeoman farmer, a woman of roughly the same age, with the kind of face that laughs easily and the kind of eyes that notice everything. She carries her own basket on her arm, her own handcards tucked inside. She has done this many times before. They do not need to explain themselves to each other. Cold, Marjorie says, by way of greeting, and shakes the snow from her shawl. Close the door properly, says our good wife warmly, or you'll have the lot of it in on the rushes. Marjorie closes the door properly and crosses the room and pulls up the other stool, the slightly taller one, the one that belongs, most evenings, to her husband, and sits down across the fire with the ease of someone entirely at home in someone else's home. She opens her basket, takes out her own fleece, her own cards, and within a few minutes of her arrival, both women are carding, side by side, in the firelight, talking. You're warm and safe here, drifting through this old winter morning. Let the voices of these 2 women come to you softly, not as words you need to follow, not as anything that requires your attention, just as the warm human sound of company of two people working and talking in a firelit room, while the snow falls outside and the pottage simmers and the dough rises slowly under its cloth. Just breathe. Let it drift. What do they talk about? Everything. Nothing. The texture of Tudor neighbourly conversation is something we can only partly reconstruct. There are no recordings, no diaries kept by village women of this social station, but we can make good educated guesses from what we know of how people live in close-knit communities anywhere, in any time. They talk about the snow, whether it will hold all week. Marjorie's husband thinks it will, based on the look of the sky this morning, which she reports with the combination of domestic authority and gentle scepticism that seems to characterize her relationship with his weather predictions generally. They talk about the miller. In Tudor villages, the miller is always a figure of conversation, partly because everyone depends on him, and he occupies a position of considerable local power, and partly because the relationship between villagers and their miller is inherently complicated. The miller takes his portion, his toll from the grain, brought to him to grind. This is accepted and understood, but the exact proportion of that toll has always been a matter of some negotiation and some feeling. Marjorie heard from the blacksmith's wife that his portion this autumn was a little more generous to himself than some might think was warranted. She says this without real malice. Our good wife makes a small sound, neither agreement nor disagreement, something more like acknowledgement, and draws her cards through the fleece again. There is, between these two women, the comfortable shorthand of close neighbours who have known each other long enough not to need to explain themselves. They share context. They share the common texture of this village's life. When Marjorie mentions a name, a place, a recent event, no background is required. The conversation can move quickly and lightly over things that would require paragraphs to explain to an outsider. The handcards move. The fleece opens. After a while, after perhaps the second or third lock has been processed into the soft, light, cylindrical bundle of prepared fibre called a rolag, Marjorie reaches into her basket and produces something wrapped in a cloth. Honey cake. Small, flat, dense, made with oats, and just enough honey to qualify it as a sweetness rather than just a staple. She made them yesterday, she says. Too many. She says it in a way that makes it clear she made exactly as many as she intended, and that the excess is a kindness offered in the form of a surplus, so as not to seem like an excessive gift. Our good wife accepts one. They eat in a brief, comfortable silence, the honey cake sweet and dense, and warming the kind of simple sweetness that means more than it should, because sweetness, in this world, is not constant. It is occasional. It is treated as a small event. This moves me, the easy generosity of it, not grand generosity, not a feast, not an expensive gift, just a honey cake brought in a cloth because there were too many, shared across the fire because they are here together, and it is cold and the morning is long. Small kindness, given lightly, received with the same lightness. The currency of neighbourliness, which in this village, in any village like this, in any time, is one of the things that makes ordinary life genuinely livable. The carding continues. The fire burns. Gradually, the basket of raw fleece diminishes, and beside it a small pile of rollags accumulates soft, fluffy, almost luminous in the firelight, each one a tight, airy cylinder of aligned fibre ready for the spindle. Some of these will be spun today, some tomorrow. Some will be traded. Some will eventually, after many hours of spinning and plying, and perhaps some simple dyeing with weld or woad or onion skin, become cloth. Cloth for a shirt, a petticoat, a patch on a worn knee. Nothing is made quickly. Nothing is made without effort. And yet, it does not feel like effort. Exactly. Not in the context of this morning, this fire, this companionship. It feels like the morning being used well. It feels like time having texture. It feels like two women sitting together and making something out of nothing, slowly with their hands, while the world outside goes on being cold and white and quiet. The pottage is beginning to smell, Not strongly, yet not the full, rich afternoon smell that will fill the room in a few hours, but just beginning, just the faintest edge of warmth and savoury and thyme, floating out from the pot over the fire and touching the air with something that makes the body register. Somewhere below conscious thought. Good. Food. Safe. Marjorie sniffs it approvingly. Our good wife smiles. They go back to the wool. The church bell rings terse. You can hear it even from inside, the cottage muffled somewhat by the snow and the walls and the general soft insulation of a winter afternoon, but present, clear enough, the single bronze voice of the village's one bell, tolling out the mid-morning hour from its tower at the far end of the lane. In a world without pocket watches, without the particular tyranny of the numbered hour, the church bell is how time speaks. Not precisely not to the minute, not even to the quarter hour, but approximately being enough. Approximately is all anyone here has ever needed. Marjorie gathers herself to go. Her own household calls her own fire, her own pot, her own bread to check, children to attend to, a husband whose midday needs she knows by long habit. She wraps her shawl, tucks her basket under her arm, accepts the brief, warm farewell that passes between close neighbours, not embraces exactly, not ceremonial, just the natural, easy closeness of two women who will almost certainly see each other again before the day is out. The door opens. Cold air. The door closes, and the cottage settles back into its quieter self. Our good wife is alone again, and the aloneness is not lonely, it never is, in a household that runs on this much continuous activity. She checks the dough, lifts the corner of the linen cloth, peers at it. The surface of the dough has risen to press gently against the cloth from beneath, domed and smooth and faintly gas-bubbled at the edges where the leaven is most active. She nods. It is doing what it should. She recovers it, checks the pottage, stirs it, tastes a little from the wooden spoon. Not quite yet. An hour more, maybe 2. She adds a small piece of wood to the fire, just one, just to maintain, and then sits back down with her spinning. Because there is always spinning. The handcards produced their pile of rolags this morning, and now the rolags want to become yarn, and yarn is produced by the drop spindle, a simple ancient tool, just a weighted disc on a stick that has been used by women in every culture in the world since long before recorded history. She draws out a length of fibre from a rolag with her fingers, attaches it to the spindle, and sets it turning. The spindle drops and turns. She feeds fibre. The twist runs up through the drafting zone between her fingers, catches the fibre, locks it into yarn, and the yarn winds onto the shaft. Drop and draft and wind. Drop and draft and wind. The spindle turns in the air below her hands like a small deliberate planet. She is half watching the fire, half watching the snow through the small deep-set window which has no glass, just a wooden shutter propped open during the day to let in what light there is, and a piece of oiled linen stretched on a frame in the worst weather to keep the rain and wind from coming straight in. Today the shutter is half open, and she can see through the gap a slice of the world outside, the low stone wall of the yard, the gate, a stretch of the lane beyond it, all white and still and falling soft with snow. Nothing moves in the lane, nothing moves anywhere. Until he does. She sees him before she hears him, the shape of him appearing at the far edge of her window frame view, coming up the lane from the direction of the eastern fields. He is large in his winter clothing, a thick wool coat over his work doublet, a felt hat pulled down against the snow, heavy leather boots that she can hear now as he comes through the gate, the crunch and squeak of them on the frozen ground of the yard. He has been out since before dawn. He has been working in this cold all day. He lifts the latch. The door swings inward, and he comes in out of the December with the particular combination of physical exhaustion and relief that is one of the most recognizable human expressions in any century. The slight forward lean of a person whose body has been asking for warmth and rest for hours and is now finally getting the first of it. He stops just inside the door, stands still for a moment, lets the warmth of the room come to him. She doesn't say anything immediately. She just looks at him. There is a great deal in that look, the quick, automatic inventory of a wife who knows her husband's body well and reads it the way you read weather, checking for injury, for the particular kind of tiredness that is just tiredness versus the kind that means something is wrong, checking the set of his shoulders and the line around his eyes. Everything she needs to know from that look tells her: cold, tired, hungry, but whole, fine. She says, "Come in properly, you're letting the cold in." He steps further in and closes the door, and the room seals itself again. His name for our purposes tonight we might as well let be simply William. William is a common enough name for a Tudor villager that it is more likely than not. He is perhaps a year or two older than his wife, with the hands and posture of someone who has worked land since childhood. Broad hands, slightly bent fingers, the particular upright with a slight forward lean of someone who has spent years using a mattock and a billhook. He is not remarkable. He would not think of himself as remarkable. He is a husbandman, a farmer who holds and works a few acres of the common field system, paying his rent in labour and kind and coin, going about the business of making the land produce what it must produce so that the household survives. Today he has been hedging. Laying a hedge, in Tudor England, is skilled winter work. The cutting and weaving of the dormant thorn stems into a stock-proof barrier that will grow back stronger for having been managed. It requires a billhook, a good eye, the ability to read the structure of growing wood, and a considerable tolerance for cold, wet fingers and scratched forearms. William has been doing it since he was a boy working alongside his father, and he is good at it in the quiet, undemonstrated way that people are good at things. They have practiced for decades, without anyone ever particularly saying so. He begins the ritual of undressing from his outdoor clothes. This is its own slow process. The outer coat first, a heavy wool garment, damp through with snow and the particular deep cold that accumulates in wool over hours of outdoor work. He hangs it on the peg by the door, where it will drip slightly on the flagstone below and need to be turned and dried through the afternoon. His hat, shaken of snow, hung on the same peg. His leather gloves stiff with cold, darkened with use stuffed into the coat pocket. Then he sits down heavily on the bench by the door and begins to work at his boots. The laces of his boots have frozen slightly. He works at them with fingers that are too cold to be dexterous. She watches this for a moment from across the room, sees the frustration forming without quite reaching his face, and sets down her spindle and crosses to him without being asked, and kneels and works the laces herself. Her fingers are warm. The laces yield to them. She has done this before. He says nothing. She says nothing. There is nothing to say. It is simply the thing that needs doing, done. Just breathe easy, my friend, wherever you are listening from. Let this small, quiet moment be exactly what it is, not dramatic, not sentimental in the way we might be tempted to make it. Just two people, one cold and one warm, and the simple wordless kindness of the warmer one kneeling to help with a frozen lace. 500 years ago, in a snow-quiet village in England, while the pottage simmered and the dough rose and the snow kept falling, just this. Just the small, ordinary intimacy of two people who know each other very well and share a life. She eases the boot off, then the second one. His feet in their thick woolen hose damp at the toes and heel from where the cold has crept in. She sets toward the fire, propping the boots nearby to dry. He flexes his toes, sighs. The sigh of the genuinely cold person encountering the first real warmth of the day, a sound that is almost involuntary, that comes from somewhere below conscious relief, from the body simply exhaling what it has been holding for hours. She hands him the ale. There is always ale in this household. Small ale, low in alcohol, the safe, everyday drink of Tudor England, in an era when the water supply, even from a good well, cannot always be entirely trusted, and when ale represents both nutrition and reliability. It is brewed here, in this household, periodically through the year, a process she manages as she manages everything else, with competence and calm. The ale in the jug has been sitting near the fire all afternoon and is warm. Not hot, just warm. He wraps both hands around the clay cup, drinks. She goes back to her spinning. He sits on the bench for a long time, not speaking, just drinking the warm ale and staring at the fire with the particular unfocused gaze of someone whose body is engaged in the primary task of warming itself and whose mind has, for the moment, been given permission to go quiet. She spins. The spindle turns. The fire speaks its soft language of pop and hiss and settle. I find this quietly beautiful. This silence between them, not an uncomfortable silence, not a silence that means anything has gone wrong or been left unsaid. A shared silence. A comfortable silence. The particular silence of two people who have been apart all day doing their separate and equally necessary work and have now arrived back at the same point, the same fire, the same room. The silence of people who don't need to fill every moment of togetherness with words because the togetherness itself is enough. After a while, he asks about the bread. She tells him it's been set. It'll be ready by late afternoon or evening. He asks about the pottage. She says a while yet. He nods, watches the fire. Presently he gets up, more slowly than he sat down, and goes to where his work bag hangs on the wall, a rough leather satchel, and takes from it a piece of harness, a length of bridle leather that has needed mending for the better part of a week, a buckle that has come partly away from the strap. He settles back onto the bench with it, and a small awl and a length of waxed thread, and begins, slowly, carefully, to restitch it. And so they work, side by side, her spinning, him mending in the firelit room in the middle of the winter afternoon, while outside the snow deepens, and the village goes about its quiet December business, and the day leans gradually toward evening. What strikes me most about this ordinary afternoon scene, and I want to say this plainly, because I think it's important, is how much work this life contains, and yet how little of it feels, in the watching of it, like hardship. Every hour of every day is occupied with something necessary. There is always something for the hands to do, and yet, and perhaps because of this, because the body is always engaged, because the day always has its shape and its purpose, there is a quality of ease to it, a quality of sufficiency. They are where they need to be, doing what needs doing, warm and together and safe. Outside, the snow is still falling, and somewhere down the lane, in 2 or 3 other cottages, other people are also beginning to notice as the afternoon deepens toward early dark, as the sky outside the window shifts from white-grey to blue-grey to the particular luminous darkness of a snow-filled evening, that today might be one of those evenings when the cold and the dark and the warmth of the fire all conspire to make staying inside together feel less like staying home and more like arriving somewhere, the kind of evening when neighbours knock, prepared to resume narrative continuation. The light has shifted. You can feel it before you can quite see it. That particular quality of late winter afternoon that comes not with drama but with a kind of gradual dimming, as though the world is turning down a lamp very slowly, by degrees too small to catch in the act. The slice of outside visible through the half-open shutter has gone from white to grey to a deep, luminous blue, the blue of snow in failing light, which is one of the most particular and beautiful colours in the world, a colour that seems to generate its own quiet glow rather than simply receiving darkness. Inside, the fire has been fed. William added 2 good oak logs an hour ago, and they have caught fully now and are burning with the deep, steady generosity of well-dried oak, not the quick, bright burn of lighter wood, but something slower and more committed, a burn that will hold for hours, that pushes heat outward, into the room in long, patient waves. The cottage is genuinely warm now, not just the area immediately around the hearth, but the whole low room warmth has settled into the plaster of the walls, into the wooden beams above, into the rushes underfoot, into the air itself, so that moving from one corner to another no longer involves any meaningful difference in temperature. The cottage has become, in the deep afternoon, a single warm body. The pottage is very close to ready. She has tasted it twice in the last hour, once with a critical spoon, once with a satisfied one, and what is in the pot now is something genuinely good. The peas have completely dissolved into the broth, thickening it to a dense golden grey consistency. The oats have swelled and softened and dissolved equally, contributing a smooth, starchy body that coats the spoon. The piece of pork has given up everything. It had its fat rendered out and dispersed through the pot, its flavour distributed evenly. The meat itself, now tender enough to pull apart at the touch of the spoon. The leeks have melted. The thyme and salt have deepened and rounded and become something more than themselves. It smells extraordinary. The smell of pottage near ready fills the cottage, the way good music fills a room completely, gently, making itself known in every corner. It reaches into the sleeping loft above. It curls under the door and into the cold air outside, where anyone passing within a few feet of this cottage in the lane will receive the faintest touch of it on the cold air, savoury and warm and deeply, anciently human. The smell of a meal being made with care. She is braiding something a length of straw, quickly and neatly when the first knock comes. 3 raps. Firm but not urgent. The knock of someone who expects a welcome. She calls out. The door opens. It is the miller's wife. Her name is Alice, and she is a substantial woman in every sense, physically broad, warm-voiced, socially generous, the kind of person around whom any room immediately rearranges itself slightly, not because she demands it, but because she radiates a kind of comfortable authority that people simply orient toward, the way plants orient toward light. She is carrying a cloth-wrapped bundle against her chest, pressed between her arm and her side, and she has snow on her shoulders and her hood and the tips of her eyelashes, which makes her look briefly, incongruously, like something from a winter story. "Come in," says our good wife, already rising, already moving toward the door with the instinctive hospitality of someone for whom opening a home to a neighbour is as natural and unconsidered as breathing. Alice comes in, stamps her feet once, twice, 3 times on the flagstone just inside the door to knock the worst of the snow from her boots, in the particular way of someone who has been taught since childhood not to track winter into other people's clean rushes. She shakes her hood, looks around the room with the warm, appreciative eyes of a frequent visitor. "It smells wonderful in here," she says, and means it. "Pottage," says our good wife, "nearly ready." "I brought bread," says Alice, and produces the cloth bundle 2 round loaves from the mill's own oven, slightly larger than the ones our good wife has been working on all day, their crusts dark gold and crackling faintly as she sets them on the table. Too much for just us tonight, with Robert away at the market. This is how it works. This is precisely how it works, in this village, on this kind of evening. The logic of Tudor winter neighbourliness is beautiful in its simplicity, not complicated by obligation, not weighted with social performance, just the completely practical understanding that warmth is better shared, that food made for one can feed several, that an evening of firelight and company is simply better than an evening of firelight alone. Alice's husband is away. Our good wife's fire is warm and her pot is full and her bread she can smell it. It is very nearly ready, it is almost done. The math of this is obvious. The solution is obvious. Come in, sit down, let's eat together. You are warm and safe here, drifting through this old winter evening. Nothing is required of you, nothing at all. Just let these warm voices come to you from across 5 centuries, gentle as the snow outside, soft as firelight on a plastered wall. Just rest. Just breathe. This all happened so very long ago, and it is nothing but warmth and company and kindness. William has looked up from his harness mending. He and Alice exchanged the brief, warm greeting of 2 people who have known each other all their lives in the way that everyone in a village of 200 souls has known everyone else all their lives, not intimately. Not with the particular closeness of the people you choose, but with the deep, textured familiarity of simply always having been in each other's world. He moves his work to the end of the bench to make room. Alice sits. She pulls her hood back from her hair, dark hair slightly damp at the temples from the snow. The second knock comes perhaps 20 minutes later. Our good wife is checking the bread she has been baking it on the hearthstone under the overturned pot, and she lifts the pot now to peer at the nearest loaf, which is golden brown and sounds hollow when she taps its underside, which means it is done when the knock comes, and she calls out, "Come in," without looking up from the bread, because she has been half expecting this one. It is Widow Agnes. She is perhaps 70 years old, which in this world is a genuinely remarkable age, not impossible, not even rare among those who have survived infancy and young adulthood, but remarkable enough that it carries its own weight in a village. Agnes has outlived a husband and 2 of her own children, and she carries this not as visible grief, but as a kind of settled, patient gravity, a deep-rootedness in the present moment that comes, perhaps, from having learned the hard way that the present moment is the one you actually have. She is small now, Agnes smaller than she used to be, bent slightly forward at the shoulder in the way of the very old, her face creased into the comfortable geography of someone who has smiled and frowned and squinted into weather for 7 decades. She carries a small clay pot, covered with a piece of cloth tied at the neck. "Elderberry cordial," she says, holding it up by way of explanation and greeting simultaneously. "Made it back in October. Too sweet for just me. There it is again. Too much bread. Too sweet for just me. The generous fiction of the excess. Nobody in this room believes that Alice baked too much, or that Agnes finds her cordial too sweet. Everyone knows exactly what this is: kindness offered in the form of surplus, generosity given the comfortable disguise of practicality, so that the receiving of it requires no awkward gratitude, no imbalance of obligation, just the simple and mutual enjoyment of a thing shared. She loves this about her village. She wouldn't call it love. Exactly, she would perhaps call it simply how things are, how they have always been, how you get through a winter. But that is what love looks like when it has been domesticated into daily life for long enough. It looks like elderberry cordial in October, and too much bread on a Tuesday, and showing up at a neighbour's door when the snow is falling and the evening is long. William rises and brings a stool for Agnes, sets it close to the fire, the closest spot, the warmest spot, the spot most suitable for someone whose bones feel the cold in ways the young cannot yet imagine. Agnes lowers herself onto it slowly, with a quiet sound of relief that is not quite a sigh and not quite a word, but something between the sound of an old body arriving at rest. "Thank you, William," she says. "Agnes," he says, which in this context functions as, "You're welcome and good evening and I'm glad you're here all at once." The fire shifts. A log settles with a soft, deep creak and a brief, bright gust of sparks that ride up the chimney and are gone. The room brightens for a moment, then settles back to its warm, amber equilibrium, the smell of the bread cooling now on the table, its crust crackling as it contracts, mixes with the pottage and the wood smoke, and the faint sweetness of the elderberry cordial that Agnes has unwrapped and set on the table. The third knock comes just as our good wife is lifting the last loaf from the hearthstone. A different knock, this one. Lighter, slightly hesitant, the knock of someone younger, someone less certain of their welcome, someone who has been standing outside in the snow for a moment longer than necessary working up to the raising of the hand. She calls out, "Come in." The door opens on Thomas. Thomas is an apprentice, perhaps 17 years old, working in the household of a local craftsman, living in his master's house as apprentices do, but his master's household is gone for the week to visit family in the next village. And Thomas has been left in charge of the workshop and has been, frankly, rather lonely. He is a thin boy, angular the way boys of 17 often are, with large hands that have not quite caught up to their eventual purpose, and a face that is trying very hard to look more settled and confident than it is. He has a dusting of snow on his dark coat and a rather endearing expression of hopeful uncertainty. He holds a small package. "Mistress," he says to our good wife, with the slightly formal address that denotes her as an adult woman of the village and him as a young person aware of the social grade between them. "My master left some dried figs. I thought I didn't think they should go to waste." Dried figs. A small luxury. A genuine rarity in a village kitchen in December. Figs are not grown in England. They come from somewhere warm and distant, purchased by people who can afford small imported luxuries at the market or the fair. That his master had them at all is interesting. That Thomas has thought to bring them to this cottage, this fire, this gathering is a small act of social bravery from a lonely boy in a cold week. She looks at him for a moment. Then she smiles genuinely, warmly, the smile of a woman who has understood everything he hasn't said. "Come in, Thomas," she says. "Come in and get warm. Close the door properly." He comes in. He closes the door properly. He finds a place on the bench near William, not too close. The careful social distance of a young person among adults he respects, and holds his cold hands toward the fire and lets out a long, slow breath that carries in it all the particular loneliness of being 17 and away from your family in the middle of winter. And the room, already warm, already good-smelling, already carrying the particular human warmth of people who like each other, gathered under a low ceiling in the snow, opens itself just a little wider, makes space. As rooms like this always have, there is a moment in every good gathering when the gathering stops being a collection of individuals and becomes something else, something more than the sum of its parts. You can feel it when it happens, a slight shift, a settling, the way the conversation loses its slightly tentative, slightly effortful quality and becomes simply natural, flowing, the way a fire stops being a collection of individual logs catching and becomes simply fire. It happens at different times in different gatherings, for different reasons that are almost impossible to predict or engineer. But when it happens, everyone in the room feels it, even if no one would say so aloud, even if nobody has the words for it. It happens now. It happens gradually, the way the best things happen, not with a signal or a turning point, but with a slow, unannounced arrival. The bread has been broken. She tore the first loaf into portions and passed them around, and Alice's loaves sit on the table for later, and everyone has a piece of bread in hand, and the pottage is still a little while from being served, and the elderberry cordial has been poured into clay cups, just a little in each, the dark garnet colour of it catching the firelight beautifully. Thomas has discovered, to his visible relief, that William wants to hear about the work of the workshop and is asking him questions with the genuine interest of a man who respects any kind of skilled handwork, and Thomas is answering with growing ease and animation. Agnes is watching the fire. She watches it the way very old people sometimes watch fires, not vacantly, not absently, but with a kind of deep, companionable attention, as though the fire is an old acquaintance, as though they have been having a long conversation for many years and have arrived at the comfortable stage where neither party needs to speak to be communicating. Her hands are folded in her lap. Her cup of cordial rests on the arm of the stool. Her eyes move with the flame. Our good wife refills the cups, sits back on her stool, looks at the people in her room. What strikes me about this moment, and I want to stay here just a little while, because I think it matters, is that this scene, this exact scene, in its essential nature, is approximately as old as the human species. People gathering in the warmth, people with something to drink, something to eat, a fire between them and the cold. People telling each other about their day, asking questions, sitting in companionable silence. The specific details change the century, the country, the clothing, the food, but the shape of it is ancient. The need it meets is ancient. We have always done this. We have always needed to do this. In Tudor England, the long winter evenings were the natural time for it. The working day in December ends early by 3 or 4 o'clock. The light is too far gone to do useful outdoor work, and even indoor tasks become harder in the growing dark, with tallow candles precious enough not to burn more than necessary. So the evening stretches long and firelit, and filling it is both necessary and natural, and the filling of it, for most village people of this era, was primarily narrative. Stories. The Tudor world was a storytelling world in a way that is genuinely difficult for us to imagine now, saturated as we are with screens and recordings and the endless supply of other people's narrative. In a village like this one, stories were not passively received. They were actively carried and performed. People were the medium, the human voice, the firelit face, the pause before the turn. These were the technology of narrative entertainment, and they were taken seriously. Good storytellers were valued. Old ones, especially people like Agnes, who carried in their memory stories that had come down through generations, stories that nobody had written down because writing was not how this knowledge moved. Agnes is such a person. She knows this about herself without vanity. It happens naturally the way it always does. William mentioned something, a sound he heard out in the eastern field this morning, a low moaning that turned out to be just wind in the old oak. But that gave him a start, and Alice says it's no wonder. In this weather, all manner of strange things sound strange. And Thomas, who is young enough that his face hasn't learned yet to hide everything, looks up from the fire with the expression of someone who finds the moaning in a field story considerably more interesting and perhaps more alarming than the adults are letting on. And Agnes smiles, slowly, the particular smile of a person who has been waiting, without rushing the moment, for exactly this opening. "Shall I tell you?" she says, in a voice that is low and unhurried and very slightly performative in the best sense. The voice of someone who knows how to tell a thing about the miller's stone, the old one, before Robert's father had it replaced. Everyone settles. Even William, who has certainly heard versions of this story before, shifts his position slightly on the bench, sets his harness mending aside with the unconscious gesture of someone clearing the decks for something worth attending to. Just breathe easy, wherever you are tonight. Let old Agnes's voice come to you through the fire and the snow, and the 500 years between her world and yours, warm and low, and full of the particular pleasure of a story well begun. You are safe here. Nothing can reach you. The snow outside is deep and still, and the fire is bright, and nothing is asked of you except to rest and listen. Agnes begins. The miller's stone, the great lower millstone, the bedstone that sits fixed while the upper runner stone turns above it, was, in Agnes's telling, not always where it is. Before it was brought to this village, before Agnes's own father's time even, it was part of something else. A stone that stood in a field at the edge of the common, one of the old stones, the kind whose reason for standing had been forgotten long before anyone now living was born. Not especially tall, not dramatically placed, just a stone, grey and lichen-covered, that had been there for as long as the village could remember and longer. There was a saying about it, Agnes tells them. Not a warning exactly, more an understanding. The saying was this, that the stone was patient, that it had been waiting for something since before memory, and that everything that had ever happened near it, the growing of grain, the turning of seasons, the long, quiet accumulation of village life was happening in the presence of that patience, whether anyone knew it or not. When the miller's father needed a new bedstone, Agnes says, he was told by the stone cutter that this particular stone was good millstone, grit dense and hard, and perfect for the purpose. And so it was moved, broken from the earth and dressed and dragged to the mill on a cart and set in place, and the mill began to work. And it did work. Well, the grain ground clean and fine. The stone ran true. No one complained. But Agnes's own mother used to say, and here Agnes pauses, lets the fire speak for a moment, lets the pause do its work, that on very quiet nights, when the mill was still and the village asleep, you could hear the stone in the mill turning, very softly, on its own, as though it remembered. Thomas makes a small sound. Agnes looks at him not unkindly, with a warmth that sees him entirely, and says, not turning to grind, not turning in anger, turning the way a sleeping person turns in the night, just settling, just remembering what it used to feel standing in the field with the wind around it. There is a silence. The fire shifts. Our good wife has her cup in both hands and her elbows on her knees, and she is looking at Agnes with the face of someone who has heard a version of this story before, but finds it, this telling, in this room, on this snow-falling evening, newly true, newly touching. There is something in the way Agnes tells it, the patience of it, the gentleness of it, The complete absence of anything frightening, the insistence on the stone's benign, slow, waiting nature that makes it feel less like a ghost story and more like something else. A comfort, almost. The idea of something that old, that patient, that content to simply be what it is. Alice says, "My grandmother said the same." Agnes nods. She knew. William says, "The stone's good stone, whatever its history," which is the pragmatic and entirely correct observation of a man who has been watching a mill work reliably for his entire life, and which somehow does not diminish the story at all. Thomas is still looking at Agnes. "Do you think it's true?" he asks. He asks it with the directness of someone young enough not to have learned yet that asking what you genuinely want to know is socially complicated. Agnes considers him for a moment. "I think," she says carefully, "that very old things have a long memory, and that memory doesn't stop being real just because the thing has become something different." She looks at the fire. The stone ground grain for 40 years. Now it's part of the mill floor, mostly cracked down one side, but it's still there, still patient. She picks up her cordial cup. Most old things are. This moves me more than I can quite say. I find this quietly, no, not quietly. I find this deeply extraordinary about the human storytelling tradition. The way stories like this one, told in cottages by firelight through generations, are not trying to frighten or to sensationalize. They are trying to say something true about the world, about time and patience and the way things accumulate meaning, about the fact that the ground beneath a village is not simply geology, it is memory. It is the layered presence of everything that has happened on and in and around it. Agnes is not frightening Thomas. She is educating him, in the most ancient and effective way there is. The fire burns on. The snow falls on. Outside, the village is entirely dark now. Not a single light visible in the lane. The world reduced to the muffled, intimate darkness of deep winter, the kind of dark that makes the inside of a lit cottage feel less like a house, and more like a small, bright universe entire in itself. The wind has picked up slightly, just enough to be audible around the edges of the door. A low, almost musical sound, the kind that would perhaps give a person pause if they were outside alone in it, but which, from inside this warm room, with these warm people, and this fire, and this story just concluded, sounds like nothing so much as the world-providing atmosphere. Alice laughs softly and says it is as if the wind heard Agnes's story. Agnes says the wind always listens. William says, "Is anyone else hungry?" And everyone suddenly, genuinely, warmly is. She lights the candle. It is a small act, and a considered one. Tallow candles are not free. They are made here, in this household, as they are made in most village households, rendered from the fat of the autumn pig, poured into moulds or dipped on wicks of twisted rush, stored carefully, used with intention. Each candle represents time and labour and material, and burning one is a decision, not an automatic thing. But tonight, with the room full of people and the supper ready, and the evening still young, and the snow making the world outside into something complete and sealed, tonight the candle is warranted. She takes it from the shelf, sets it in its iron holder, a simple spike base holder, hammered out at some village forge, functional and undecorated, carries a small twig to the fire, holds it until it catches, and then touches the small flame to the wick. The wick takes. A small, tentative flame appears yellow and slightly smoky for the first few seconds, the way tallow candles always begin, then steadying, brightening, finding its balance. She sets the candle holder on the table, in the centre, and steps back. The room changes. Not dramatically. The firelight was already warm and generous, already doing most of the work of illuminating this low, close space. But the candle adds something different, a second source, a more intimate one, closer to the human face. The fire speaks from one direction, broad and amber and shifting. The candle speaks from the table, smaller and steadier, and between them the room is caught in a crossfire of warm light that finds the faces of everyone seated and makes them briefly luminous. William's hands, setting aside the last of his harness work, Alice's broad, smiling face, already turned toward the pot. Thomas, who has relaxed so completely in the last hour that he has actually let his back rest against the wall behind the bench and his long legs stretch toward the warmth. Agnes, still on her stool by the fire, her face in the candlelight looking not old exactly but seasoned, rich with time. And our good wife, moving to the pot. She takes the long-handled ladle from its hook iron, with a slight bend in the handle from some long-ago mishap, which she has long since incorporated into her grip, and lifts the lid from the pottage pot. A great cloud of steam rises immediately, fragrant and dense, filling the space around the hearth with the full, warm, completely realized smell of a meal that has been cooking for the better part of a day. The smell is extraordinary. Let it reach you. Wherever you are lying warm and still tonight, close your eyes if they are not already closed, and let that smell come to you across the centuries, warm and starchy and savoury, with the thyme underneath it, and the sweetness of the dissolved leeks and the deep, mineral richness of the long-cooked pork, the smell of a meal made with patience and care in a warm room on a cold evening, the smell of enough, the smell of being fed. She stirs the pottage once, slowly, from the bottom. It is thick. The ladle moves through it with resistance, the way a ladle moves through something that has spent hours becoming more than the sum of its parts. The colour is a deep golden grey, the surface smooth except where the ladle disturbs it. She brings the ladle up and lets a stream of pottage fall back into the pot, thick, cohesive, coating the ladle with a generous layer. Perfect. She looks up. "Come to the table," she says. It is not a grand announcement. It is not a formal call to supper. It is simply the statement of a fact, and an invitation rolled into one, delivered in the unhurried tone of someone who has said it many times before, and expects it to be received the way it always is, without ceremony, with immediate willingness. They come to the table. The table is small, a single plank top set on 2 trestles, the kind of simple, portable furniture that is typical of a household that has not yet the means for built-in furniture, where the table can be taken apart and leaned against the wall when the floor space is needed for other things. Tonight it is set up fully, pushed slightly toward the centre of the room for the gathering, and around it they arrange themselves, William on the bench at one side, Alice beside him, Thomas at the end in the slightly uncertain way of a young person who is not sure which spot to take. Agnes brought her stool, which William carries for her without being asked. Our good wife stands. She will serve. This is her role tonight. In her house, at her table, not servitude but hosting, the particular pleasure of the person who has made the thing and now gets to give it. There is genuine satisfaction in this, in the distributing of what you have made something that goes back in human experience further than any history book can follow. She ladles pottage into the first bowl, clay bowl, thick-walled, slightly rough on the outside where the fingers grip it, the kind of bowl that holds heat beautifully, that warms the hands as well as the inside. She sets it before Agnes first, then William, then Alice, then Thomas, who receives his with a murmured thanks, and the expression of someone who did not quite realize until this moment how hungry he was. Then herself. She brings a bowl for herself and sits at the remaining corner of the table, and for a moment, just a moment before anyone begins, there is a stillness. Not a formal grace, not necessarily this is a village household, not a great house, and the forms of prayer at meals range widely through Tudor society from the elaborate to the instinctive, but something, a pause, a breath, a shared recognition, even if unspoken, that there is food, and they are together, and that this is good. Agnes says, quietly, almost under her breath, "Thanks be." 2 words. Entirely sufficient. And then the spoons come out. Each person produces their own tucked in a pocket or a pouch, because in Tudor England, you carry your own eating implements as a matter of course, and the spoon is a personal object, often a prized one, sometimes carved by a husband for a wife, or a father for a child, sometimes the only small luxury a person owns. William's spoon is horn, dark and smooth. Alice's is pewter, a little dented. Thomas produces a wooden one, clearly his master's household spoon, slightly too large for him. Agnes's is very old bone, worn to a high gloss. Our good wife's spoon is wood. She carved it herself, years ago, before she was married, under the instruction of her father. It is not quite symmetrical, the bowl is slightly off-centre, one side of the handle thicker than the other in the way of a first attempt at something learned by hand. She has been offered better spoons since. She has always kept this one. And then, the eating. I want to stay with this moment. I want to describe it slowly, because I think it deserves slowness, deserves the kind of attention we almost never give to the act of eating when we are actually doing it, though we know, somewhere, that eating together is one of the fundamental human ceremonies. The first spoonful of pottage is everything the smell promised. The base of it is smooth and thick, the dissolved peas and oats creating a texture that is dense without being heavy, substantial without being stodgy, a texture that the body receives with something very close to relief, the way the body always receives real nourishment when it has been working hard in the cold. The leeks have entirely surrendered their individual identity and become part of the broth, lending sweetness. The thyme is present but not sharp. It has spent all day softening, becoming part of, rather than topping the flavour. The pork gives a deep, round, smoky richness to everything. The bread is torn. Alice tears a piece from her loaf, the crust crackling satisfyingly, and hands it along. William takes a piece. Thomas takes his with careful restraint and then, catching our good wife's eye and seeing there a warmth that gives him permission, takes a second piece. Alice laughs. Our good wife says eat. It's there for eating. The bread is for dipping. Not with self-consciousness, not as a stylistic choice, just practically, naturally. The way you eat pottage with bread in this world, pushing the bread through the thick surface of the soup and bringing up bread heavy with broth. The bread itself now transformed, no longer just bread, but something wetter and warmer and more complex, tasting of everything the pot has been doing all day. You are so safe and so warm, dear listener, drifting through this old winter evening. Let this meal come to you softly, not as something to be analysed or reconstructed, just as warmth and nourishment and the sound of people eating together in a firelit room, spoons on clay, the small sounds of satisfaction, the occasional voice, the fire behind it all. Just rest in it. The dried figs appear. Thomas, remembering his contribution with a slight flush of pride and awkwardness in equal measure, produces them from his coat pocket and sets them on the table. They are small and dark and slightly crystallized on the outside, where the sugar has migrated to the surface and dried intensely sweet, intensely flavored, nothing like the bland, dried fruit of less careful cultivation. Each fig is a concentrated thing, a small packet of summer from somewhere warm and distant, somehow arrived at this table in a snowy English village in December. Agnes takes one, holds it between her fingers for a moment, smells it. From somewhere far away, she says softly, not sadly, just noticing, just acknowledging the small miracle of a fig at a winter table in the English Midlands. Our good wife asks Thomas if he knows where his master gets them. He doesn't, exactly. A merchant, he thinks, from the market at the town. Alice says the merchant who comes to their market has all manner of things if you have the coin. William says the coin is the difficulty, which is true, and is received with the rueful, uncomplaining acknowledgement of people who are entirely familiar with the difficulty and have organised their lives well around it. This is not a bitter observation. It is simply an accurate one, delivered without drama, received without drama. The cordial, Agnes's elderberry cordial, which has been sitting in its clay bottle all evening, is poured now into the cups a little in each, because there is not much, because it was made for one and is being shared among 5. The colour of it in the candlelight is extraordinary dark red, almost purple, with a depth that makes it look more solid than liquid, like a concentrated version of the elderberry bush in October. It tastes sweet and sharp and slightly medicinal, and entirely of the season it was made in, the season of heavy berry-laden branches and early fallen leaves, and the smell of autumn in the air. Our good wife holds her cup, looks around the table. William, eating with the concentrated appreciation of a hungry man. Alice, talking to Thomas now, asking him about his family, her broad warm face attentive and kind. Thomas, answering, opening up. She can see it. The slight defensive hunch leaving his shoulders, his voice becoming less careful, more natural. Agnes, eating small spoonfuls with the deliberate pleasure of someone for whom eating is still, at 70, one of the genuine enjoyments of existence. The candle, the fire, the snow outside. She sets her cup down, picks up her spoon, eats her pottage. And what she feels, what I believe she feels, what I think anyone in a room like this on an evening like this might feel, is something so simple it barely has a name. Something that is not happiness exactly, not contentment exactly, not gratitude exactly, though it contains elements of all three. Something more like rightness, the sense that this room, these people, this food, this fire, this snow-quieted world outside is exactly what an evening should be, that nothing is missing, that everything necessary is here. We have always known this feeling. It is one of the oldest things we know. The bowls have been set aside, not washed yet, that is later work, morning work, when the water is fetched fresh and the fire is hot enough to warm it. For now the bowls simply sit at the edges of the table, wiped clean of most of their pottage by the last pieces of bread, stacked loosely in the way of a meal recently finished and not yet tidied away. The bread is mostly gone. The elderberry cordial is entirely gone. The figs are entirely gone. Thomas having eaten the last one with the slightly abashed expression of someone who realizes only after the fact that he has eaten more than his share, and everyone having smiled and said nothing, because there is no version of this gathering in which a hungry 17-year-old eating the last fig is anything other than exactly right. The table has been pushed back slightly, the benches rearranged. Everyone has found their angle toward the fire, their preferred distance from the heat, their particular way of settling into the post-supper hour. William is back on the bench, legs extended, hands loose in his lap, the posture of someone who has worked hard and eaten well, and is now deeply, deservedly at rest. Alice has taken the heavy chair. Our good wife pressed it on her. It is the most comfortable seat in the house, and Alice accepted with the gracious lack of excessive protest of someone who knows when a gift is genuinely offered. Thomas has moved his position imperceptibly so that he is now closer to William than he was before supper, drawn, without quite knowing it, toward the steady, settled presence of a man whose company is simply comfortable. Agnes is holding her empty cordial cup. She holds it the way old hands hold things when they are at rest, loosely, without purpose, just for the small warmth of having something to hold. The fire speaks. It has burned down a little from its afternoon height. Not dying, not even close, just moving through its arc. The oak logs that were bright an hour ago are now deep and red-cored, glowing rather than flaming, giving off their heat in long, steady pulses. The light in the room is lower and warmer and more amber than it was. It touches everything softly. It makes the rough plaster walls glow like pale gold. It makes the hanging bunches of dried herbs, the thyme, the sage, the lavender cast long, branching shadows on the ceiling beams. It is the hour, in this world, that might be called the soul of the evening. The work is done. The food is eaten. The day has been fully used, and what remains this wide, warm, firelit hour is simply presence. Simply being here, in this room, with these people, doing nothing in particular and everything that matters. Our good wife is the one who begins it. She does not announce it. She does not say, "Now we shall sing," or "Let us have some music," or anything that would give the moment a self-consciousness it doesn't need. She simply begins to hum. It starts so quietly that for a moment it is indistinguishable from the fire, a low, soft, wordless sound, a melodic thread that she follows without quite deciding to follow it, the way you follow a thought that arrives already fully formed. The tune is a psalm tune, Psalm 23, as it happens not in the version we might know now, the Elizabethan metered version that will come a few decades later, when Sternhold and Hopkins put the Psalms to singable tunes and print them for the common people. This is an older version, simpler, the kind that has been passed mouth to mouth in English parish churches since before anyone in this room was born. A tune that the body knows before the mind does, because it has been heard at every Sunday service, every holy day, every occasion when the village gathered in its cold stone church and lifted voices together. The Lord is my shepherd. She doesn't sing the words, she only hums, but every person in this room knows the words behind the melody. Every person in this room has those words woven so deeply into their life that hearing the tune is the same as hearing the text. The words rise unbidden, internally, like something being remembered rather than thought of. Alice picks it up first, not with words humming still, the same wordless melody, joining from one voice above in a natural, unplanned harmony that she finds by instinct, the way village singers always find harmonies, by ear, by the knowledge of what sounds right next to what, learned over a lifetime of singing in close proximity to other voices. Her voice is warm and round and sits comfortably in the middle range, a voice that was made for this, for sitting in a warm room after supper and adding itself to something larger. William joins. His voice is lower, not a bass exactly. Nothing trained or deliberate about it, just the natural register of a man who has sung this melody in this key his whole life, his voice finding the bottom of the tune and filling it. The sound of him is like the foundation of a building, not the part you admire exactly, but the part without which nothing else could stand. Thomas, after a moment, a pause in which he can be seen deciding, the slight self-consciousness of a young person about to commit to something, adds his voice. Tentative at first, his pitch slightly uncertain, correcting itself after the first phrase, settling into the melody with a concentration that is almost endearing. But he is in it now. His voice is light and clear, and will, in a few years, become something finer. The voice is still finding itself, but tonight it adds its thread, and the thread is welcome. Agnes does not hum. Agnes sings. Not loudly, not performatively, but openly, with words in a low, steady voice that is older and quieter than it once was, but which carries within it the unmistakable quality of a voice that has been singing for 70 years and knows what it is doing. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. Just breathe, dear friend, wherever you are. Just let these voices reach you, 5 voices in a firelit room. 5 people who have eaten and talked and laughed and listened to a story about a patient stone, and are now, without having planned it, without self-consciousness or arrangement, simply singing together in the dark of a December evening, while the snow falls outside and the fire glows and the candle gutters gently in the air of the room. You are so completely safe. Nothing is needed of you. Nothing is asked. Just rest in the warm sound of human voices singing something old and gentle and true. He restoreth my soul. There is a quality to singing in a small, low-ceilinged room that is different from singing anywhere else. The ceiling is close, those dark beams, that rough plaster, and the sound has nowhere to go but around. And around it goes, touching every surface and coming back slightly changed, slightly warmed, slightly fuller than it left. The stone walls help too. Even plaster over stone reflects sound, with a solidity that wood alone cannot match. The room becomes, when voices are raised in it, a kind of acoustic vessel, a container not just for bodies and warmth, but for sound. For the sound of people being together in the most ancient way. She is aware of this. Not consciously, not in the way that someone who has studied acoustics would be aware of it, just in the body, in the particular feeling of singing in this room versus singing in the open air. There is something about the room that holds the singing, that keeps it close. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. The line arrives and Agnes sings it without hesitation, without any drama, with the same calm and steady voice she has used for everything before it. And in this room, on this evening, with this particular company, the words do not feel dark, they feel honest. They feel like something said by a person who has walked through many kinds of difficulty and has found, at the other end, that they are still here, still warm, still singing. For thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thomas has stopped humming and is listening to Agnes sing the words, his face open and still and very young. The tune comes round to its gentlest place, the last verses, the table prepared, the cup running over, the goodness and mercy following, and the voices that have been holding it, carrying it through the room and around and back again, begin to soften, not to stop to soften, to let the melody become quieter, more interior, more like something passing through the room from somewhere else rather than something originating here. And it does soften, and it does pass through, and when it ends not with a definitive stop but with a trailing away, the last phrase hummed rather than sung, Alice's harmony dissolving last of all into the sound of the fire. The silence that follows is not emptiness, it is fullness. The particular fullness of a space from which music has just departed, which still holds the shape of it the way a room holds warmth after the fire has been banked, or the way a bowl holds the smell of something good long after it has been emptied. Nobody speaks for a moment. Then William says quietly, without looking up from the fire, "My mother used to sing that one." A small pause. "Mine too," says Alice. Another pause. Agnes says nothing, but she is smiling, and the smile is enough. This moves me so deeply that I want simply to sit in it for a while, and I hope you will sit in it with me. This thread, this melodic thread that travelled from mouth to mouth through generations, from parents to children to grandchildren, through cold churches and warm cottages and every kind of human circumstance, connecting a room full of Tudor villagers to their mothers and their mothers' mothers and back and back and back, into a history of people singing the same words over fires of their own. This thread is not broken. It is still unbroken, because the 23rd Psalm is still sung, right now, somewhere in the world, on this same night that we sit together in this imagined cottage. Someone is singing those same words, in a different language, in a different tradition, in a different room, but the same words, the same essential comfort they have always carried, the same promise of restoration and presence, and the lack of fear. He restoreth my soul. Still, 5 centuries from this room, and the thread is still unbroken. I find this quietly I find this profoundly extraordinary. The continuity of it, the way something so simple, so small, so domestic as a handful of people humming a familiar tune after supper, can contain, within it, the entire length of human experience. Thomas shifts on the bench, asks Agnes, softly still in the register of the singing, still keeping the rooms quiet if she knows any other songs. Agnes considers. She knows several. She knows around a simple 3-part round, very old, the kind of song that was taught to children and passed between friends at exactly these kinds of gatherings, and is not religious at all but purely festive, a song about a cuckoo and a winter fire and spring coming back, the kind of song that exists in every culture in some form, because every culture that has winters has needed to sing about the spring. She starts it. She gives them each their entry point, Alice first, then William, then Thomas and our good wife together, and the round begins, hesitantly, with some laughing at a missed entry, with some collisions of melody where the parts run together before they've quite found their separation, and then gradually, gloriously settling into its 3-strand weaving, each voice carrying its part over and under and beside the others, the melody cycling and returning and cycling again, the words about the cuckoo and the fire and the spring coming round and round, like the turning of a stone, like the turning of the year. It is not perfect. It is considerably better than perfect. It is the real thing voices that know each other, in a room that holds them, on an evening that has made space for exactly this. The round continues. The fire burns. The snow falls on, outside, in the deep December dark, and the cottage is so full of warmth and sound and the particular human completeness of people together at the end of a good day, that there is, in this moment, genuinely nothing missing. Not one thing. The round has wound itself down. The way rounds do not stopping so much as thinning, one voice dropping away and then another, until only Agnes is left carrying the last phrase alone. And then she too lets it go, and the melody dissolves into the warm air of the room and is gone. Thomas is grinning. It is the unguarded grin of someone who has surprised himself, who came to this evening as a lonely boy in a borrowed kitchen, and arrived, somewhere in the last 2 hours, at something else entirely. Something warmer. Something he will carry home with him through the snow, and will still be carrying, without quite knowing it, many years from now. The candle has burned down noticeably. An inch, perhaps more. The flame is lower now, set in a wider pool of its own tallow, slightly less steady than it was at the beginning of the meal. It shivers occasionally in the small movements of air that even a sealed room like this one generates. The micro-drafts of people breathing and shifting and turning their faces. Each shiver sends the shadows leaping briefly along the walls, and each settling back is a small return to amber equilibrium. It is time. Everyone feels it. The way you feel the turning of a gathering without anyone having to announce it, the slight shift in the room's energy, the natural drawing toward conclusion. Not because the evening has been anything less than good, but because good things have their own completion, their own natural shape, and this one has reached its end. The fire has burned to its banking hour. The snow outside is deep. The morning comes early in a household like this one. Alice is the first to rise. She does it with the decisive ease of a woman who knows her own mind stands, shakes out her skirts, retrieves her shawl from the peg and wraps it with practiced efficiency. She gathers her empty breadcloth, folds it small and tucks it into her basket. She takes both of our good wife's hands in hers, holds them for a moment. There are no long speeches. There is no elaborate farewell, just the warm grip of two women's hands, and Alice looking at her neighbour with the frank, uncomplicated affection of someone who doesn't need occasion or ceremony to make her feelings known. "Good evening," she says, which means, "This was good. You made it good. Thank you." "Good evening," says our good wife, which means the same thing back. William opens the door for Alice, and the cold rushes in briefly, shockingly, after the long warm hours of the cottage's interior, and then the door closes behind her, and her footsteps crunch away down the lane, growing fainter and then gone. Thomas stands. He is slightly awkward in his rising, unfolding those long limbs from the bench with the self-consciousness of a young person who has relaxed so completely that returning to his public self requires a moment of reassembly. He pulls his coat on, retrieves the cloth that held the figs empty now, folded neatly by our good wife at some point during the evening and set at his elbow without his noticing. He looks at his hosts, at William, who extends a hand the handshake of equals, offered to a young man who has conducted himself well this evening, and is being told so in the only language William uses for such things. Thomas takes it with a seriousness that is both touching and correct. At our good wife, who says simply, "Come back when your master returns, Thomas. You are welcome here." He nods, swallows, says "Thank you, mistress," with a formality that carries within it everything he actually means, which is, "This evening was something I needed and did not know I needed and will not forget." And then he too is out into the cold, and his footsteps too grow fainter, and the door seals the cold back out. Agnes takes longer. Not because she lingers over her farewell. Agnes is not a lingering kind of person, but because the process of an old woman rising from a low stool, wrapping a heavy shawl, retrieving a clay pot, finding her footing on a stone floor, is simply a process that takes the time it takes. She does not rush it. She does not apologize for it. She simply does it, with the patient acceptance of someone who has made peace with what her body requires of her. William brings her lantern. It is a small iron lantern, a pierced iron case holding a tallow candle stub, designed to be carried by hand, to throw enough light to see the lane without being extinguished by the wind. He lit it from the hearth, and he hands it to Agnes with a care that is both practical and gentle, making sure her fingers have it firmly before he lets go. Agnes looks at him, then at our good wife. "Good children," she says quietly, and it is the highest thing she knows how to say to them. coming from 70 years of watching people, the observation, earned and considered, that these two are good, that this house is good, that an old woman who has outlived so much is glad, on a December evening, to have somewhere warm to come to, and someone warm to come to it with. You're safe here, dear friend, wherever you are resting. This all happened so very long ago, and it is passing through you now like warm light through old glass, softened, gentled, arriving without edges. Just let Agnes's lantern bob away down the lane. Just let the snow receive her footsteps. Just breathe and rest, and stay a little longer in this cottage that is going quiet now, going gentle, going toward its own sleep. The door closes for the last time tonight. Our good wife stands still for a moment after it closes. In the particular stillness that follows a gathering, the room slightly different for having held people. The arrangement of stools subtly changed, Alice's empty cup still on the arm of the chair, Thomas's folded cloth still at the end of the bench. She begins, quietly, to put things in their places, not hurrying, not with any urgency or industry, just the natural tidying of someone who likes to end the day with her house in order, who has always found something calming in the returning of things to where they belong. The cups collected, rinsed with a little water from the bucket, set on the shelf. The stool returned to its corner, the chair pushed back to its place by the fire. The breadcloth folded and put away. William helps without being asked. He carries the table back to its usual position along the wall, lifts the two trestles and leans them beside it, takes the breadboards to the shelf. He does it with the same quiet efficiency with which he does everything, not performing helpfulness, just participating in the end of the day, because the end of the day is shared work as much as everything else has been. They move around each other in the small space with the unconscious coordination of two people who have shared a room for years, stepping to one side without looking, reaching past without collision, the domestic choreography of a long partnership made entirely of small, unremarked negotiations. She comes to the pottage pot, faithful all day, now sitting with its last inch of warm pottage at the bottom, its fire-blackened exterior radiating the last of the afternoon's heat. She sets the lid on it firmly. Tomorrow morning she will add water, and whatever is available, and it will begin again. The pot never truly empties, never truly starts over from nothing. It simply continues, accumulating, deepening, the flavour of each day layering into the next in the way that long-used iron pots hold history in their seasoning. Now, the fire. She kneels. The same flagstone, the same slight warmth of it under her knees, even now, even at the end of the long day, still holding something of all the hours of heat it has absorbed. She picks up the poker and tends the fire one last time, moving the remaining wood to judge what is left. How much has become coal and ash? What can be held? There is plenty. The oak has done its work well. She takes the poker and draws the coals together, carefully, slowly, the way her mother taught her and her grandmother taught her mother, gathering the living heat into a compact centre, removing spent ash from the edges with a small iron shovel, creating a mound of glowing orange red that breathes slowly in the draught of the chimney. Then she takes the curfew, the clay dome. She holds it for a moment, not dramatically, not sentimentally, just practically, checking that it is whole, that there are no new cracks she hasn't noticed. It is whole. She lowers it carefully over the banked coals, settling its rim onto the hearthstone so that the seal is close, so that just enough air gets through to keep the coals alive, but not enough to let them burn through the night. The glow beneath it dims. The room, which has been lit all evening by fire and candle both, is now lit only by the thin orange threads of light that escape around the edges of the curfew slender, intermittent lines of amber in the darkness of the hearth. The candle she has already pinched out, the small spiral of smoke from its wick the only evidence it existed. The room is dark, or nearly there is the very faint luminescence of snow glow coming through the half-closed shutter, that particular pale winter light that is not quite darkness, that turns everything in the room to soft grey shapes, rather than black nothing. She can see enough. She has always been able to see enough. William's hand finds her shoulder. She reaches up and puts her hand over his. They stand like that for a moment, both looking at the banked fire, the curfew glowing faintly at its edges, the room quieting around them, and it is the kind of moment that contains more than it appears to contain. The whole day in it, the cold morning and the well and the bread and the long afternoon and the evening of company, and the round that went around 3 times before it ended, all of it here, in this quiet standing together, in the warmth of a hand on a shoulder. Then she lets go, and he lets go. She crosses to the ladder, puts her hand on the first rung. Before she climbs, she turns back once and looks at her room, the banked fire, the stacked bowls, the table against the wall, the spindle and its growing yarn, the kneading trough rinsed and upturned to dry, the pot with its lid, the flour ark, the salt pig, the dried herbs hanging from the rafters, their shadows lost now in the general darkness, but their smell still present, faintly, in the warm air of the room. Everything in its place, everything accounted for. The day, this particular day, this December day in the 1530s, this day of cold water and rising dough, and long-simmered pottage and wool carded by firelight and harness, mended, and guests welcomed, and a story told, and a song sung, and a meal shared, this day is done. And it was, in all its unremarkable particulars, in all its repetition of things done yesterday and to be done again tomorrow, in all the ways it will leave no record and be remembered by no one. It was enough. It was more than enough. She climbs the ladder. 7 rungs. The cold of the sleeping loft, the warmth of the wool blanket, the close darkness of the roof above her face. She is asleep before the coals beneath the curfew have dimmed by a single degree. Downstairs in the quiet cottage the fire breathes. Slowly, steadily, patient as a stone. Let the cottage go quiet now. Let the lane outside go quiet. Let the snow settle over the rooftops and the common and the frozen ruts in the road and the tops of the low stone walls. Let the smoke from the chimneys thin and rise and dissolve into the deep December sky. Let the village sleep, all 200 souls of it, tucked into their low beds under their wool blankets, their banked fires breathing softly beneath their curfews, their dogs curled at their doors, their bread rising or their bread baked and put away, their days done and their nights begun. Let it all go quiet, and let us stay here for a little while longer. Not in the cottage exactly, not watching, not following, just here, in the space between then and now, in the gentle nowhere of a story that has been told and not quite finished. Just breathing, just sitting with what the evening has given us, the way you sit with a good meal after the table has been cleared and the guests have gone, and the room holds the warmth and the smell of everything that happened in it. I want to talk to you about the fire, not any particular fire, not the one we have been watching all evening, though that one too. I mean the fire as a thing in itself, as a presence in human life so old and so continuous that it exists somewhere, below history, below culture, below any specific time or place. Fire is older than language. Fire is older than agriculture, older than villages, older than the concept of a winter evening and the need to fill it. For somewhere between 1 million and 2 million years, the ancestors of every human being alive today gathered around fire, warmed themselves at it, cooked at it, told stories in its light, went to sleep to its sound. The sound, that is what I keep coming back to tonight. The particular sound of a wood fire in a small room, the settling of logs, the whisper of flame on dry bark, the occasional pop and crack of a knot, releasing its steam, the low, continuous breathing sound. That is the fire consuming itself, and the air around it in that ancient, generous exchange. This sound entered the human nervous system before the human nervous system was what it is now. It is coded into us at a level that no amount of time or modernity has quite reached. When you hear a fire, something in you relaxes, something very old, something that predates every anxiety you have ever carried, every complication of modern life, every piece of noise that fills your ordinary days. Something beneath all of that simply recognizes the fire and says, safe, warm, here, rest. You are feeling that now, I hope. Even without a fire beside you, even in your warm modern room, your soft bed, your quiet house, I hope the echo of this evening's fire has reached you. I hope the sound of it, described and imagined and slow built across the last several hours, has found that old place in you, where fire lives, and given it something to hold, because that is, in the end, what this evening has been about. Not the specific facts of Tudor England, though I hope those have been interesting, and true, and worth carrying. Not the particular woman whose hands we have followed all day, though I hope she has become real to you, real enough to matter. Not the history exactly, or the anthropology, or the domestic archaeology of a world 5 centuries gone. It has been about continuity, about the thread. Agnes spoke of it without quite saying it in her story about the millstone, that patient stone that remembered what it was even after it became something new. The thread of memory running through things. The way objects and gestures and songs carry within them the accumulated weight of all the times they have been used and sung and performed, all the way back to their beginning. What strikes me most, sitting with this evening now that it has ended, is how much of what we watched tonight was not specific to Tudor England at all. The fire tended in the cold dark of early morning that is not Tudor, that is ancient, that is every person who has ever woken before dawn and crossed cold floors to coax warmth from embers. That is a gesture repeated so many millions of times across so many thousands of years that it has worn a groove in human experience, a groove that any of us can fall into and feel immediately. Yes, this. I know this. The bread made from grain and water and wild leaven and patience, not Tudor, older than civilization, almost. The hands that kneaded dough in that elm trough were doing what hands have done in every culture that has ever grown grain. The same motion, the same resistance of the dough, the same transformation under pressure. The water fetched from the well in the cold in different forms, in different vessels from different sources. This walk has been made by billions of people across all of human time. The cold of the handle, the weight of the full bucket, the care taken not to spill, the neighbours gathering in the warmth when the weather is bad and the evening is long ancient, irreducibly human. Before villages, before houses even, people gathered in the warmth when the cold came. The specific shape of the gathering changes. The essential need it meets does not. Just let that old world drift by while you rest. You are warm and still, and the night is deep and kind, and this is simply a story, simply a long and gentle meditation on what it has always meant to be human in winter, to be warm when the cold is pressing at every wall, to be fed when the hunger is real, to be in company when the dark is long. What the fire remembers, I think, is this. It remembers all the faces it has ever lit, every person who has ever sat before a fire and stared into it. And there have been so many, so uncountably many, stretching back across the full length of human time, has had, in some sense, the same experience, the same light on the face, the same warmth on the hands and chest, the same quality of attention that fire induces absorbed, slightly suspended, the mind following the flame's movement, with the particular focus that is also a kind of release. Our good wife had it tonight. William had it, staring at the coals while the warm ale did its work. Agnes had it, with her 70 years of fires reflected back in her eyes. Thomas had it, young Thomas, who came in lonely and left warm and will carry this evening forward into all his subsequent evenings as a kind of template, a kind of memory of what an evening can be. And we have had it, following them. I find this quietly, truly quietly, in the most settled and unhurried part of myself. I find this one of the most comforting ideas I know, that we are not isolated in our experience of being alive, that the woman who banked her fire 500 years ago in a snow-covered English village was doing something that connects, through an unbroken chain of repetition and transmission and human necessity, to every person who has ever made warmth against the cold, to you, tonight, warm in your bed, at the end of a day that had its own cold and its own work and its own gathering, however modern its form, however different its details. The thread runs from her hands to yours. This moves me because it means something about loneliness that I think is important and true. We often feel, in our modern lives, extraordinarily alone. Alone in our specific anxieties, alone in our specific joys, alone in the particular texture of our particular days, which seem too small and too individual to be of any real significance in the broad sweep of things. What does it matter, this Tuesday, this kettle, this quiet room, this ordinary winter evening? It matters in the way that hers mattered, which is to say, completely, which is to say, it is everything. The small domestic acts of warmth and nourishment and welcome, the fire tended, the meal made, the door open to a cold neighbour, the cup of something sweet shared around, these are not the footnotes to human history. They are not the background to the important events. They are the event. They are the continuous event, the one that never stopped happening, the one that is happening right now in 10,000 forms in every corner of the world. Every meal shared, every fire tended, every threshold crossed into warmth, every voice added to a song that everyone already knows, every person across all of time who came in out of the cold. You are part of that tonight, not metaphorically. Actually, you have done this. You have made warmth and shared food and opened your door and been welcomed through someone else's. You have hummed something familiar without deciding to. You have sat by your version of a fire and let your hands rest and felt, for a moment, the particular grace of being exactly where you are, with enough, with warmth, with the day done, and the night permitting rest. She did not know that we would follow her today. She had no idea, tending her coals in the cold dark of a December morning 500 years ago, that anything she did would be witnessed or remembered or found meaningful by anyone outside her own small world. She did not need to know. The meaning was in the doing, not the being watched. But we have watched. And what I want to say, as the fire burns low and the snow settles deep over her sleeping village and over the whole quiet dark of this long winter evening, what I want to say is simply this. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing rest. Thank you for letting the world go quiet for a little while, and following a young woman's hands through a cold morning and a warm afternoon and a firelit evening, in a world that moved slowly and smelled of wood smoke and knew how to make enough feel like abundance. Thank you for remembering her, even without knowing her name, even without any record of her face. She was here. She kept her fire. She made her bread and set her pot and opened her door and sang her song and banked her coals at the end of the day. And now you have rested in the warmth of it, 500 years later, and the thread holds. The village is asleep. All of it. Every cottage, every household, every banked fire breathing softly under its curfew. The snow has stopped falling sometime in the deep middle of the night. It simply ceased, quietly, without announcement, the way snow always stops, and the world it has left behind is perfectly, completely still. The lane is unmarked, the common is unbroken white. The elm trees at the field's edge stand bare and dark against a sky that has cleared to show stars, sharp, cold, brilliant stars. The kind that only appear on the coldest and clearest of nights, when the air has been washed clean by snow, and everything between the earth and the sky has been removed. The village sleeps under those stars. 200 people, breathing slowly. 20 fires, breathing slowly. One December night, holding all of it gently, the way the earth always holds what has happened on it without judgment, without preference, without anything except the vast and patient capacity to contain. The church tower is very still against the sky. The mill wheel has stopped turning frozen, probably. The mill pond gone to ice in the night. It will take the morning sun to free it, and the morning sun in December is not in any hurry. But it will come. It always comes. Even in the shortest days, even in the grey and difficult heart of an English winter, the light comes back. It always has. And somewhere inside, one low cottage on the lane, a timber-framed cottage with a thatched roof rounded soft with snow, with a crooked gate and a small yard where hens will emerge at first light with great indignation about the state of things, 2 people are sleeping, warmly, deeply, their fire banking beneath its clay dome, patient and alive, holding its heat through the long dark hours, the bread from today on the shelf, wrapped in cloth, the pot still faintly warm, with tomorrow already inside it in the form of what today has left behind, the spindle resting, the handcards resting, the leather harness, mended, hung back on its peg, everything in its place, the day finished, and upstairs in the sleeping loft, in the close darkness under the low roof, she is dreaming. We don't know what she is dreaming, we can't know, and it doesn't matter. What matters is that she is warm, and her fire is holding, and her house is in order, and the people she loves are safe, and the people she welcomed this evening have gone home through the snow with full stomachs and warm hearts, and the day she made with her hands, her patience, her knowledge, her generosity was good. It was completely, entirely, unremarkably good, and now she is resting in it. As you are resting now, you are so warm, dear friend. You are so completely, entirely safe. Whatever the day was, whatever it asked of you, whatever it gave you, whatever it took, it is done now. It is behind you now, as thoroughly behind you as that December day is behind her, settled into the past where all days eventually go, where they become simply what happened, simply the material the life is made of, no longer requiring anything from you. You can let it go now, all of it. Just breathe. Feel the weight of your body against whatever is holding it, the mattress, the pillow, the soft press of warmth all around you. Feel how held you are, how supported, how the world at this particular moment is asking nothing of you except to rest. Just like her, just like every person who has ever banked their fire at the end of a long day and climbed to their bed and let the darkness take them gently down. There have been so many of them. There are so many of you, all resting now, in your different rooms and different centuries and different lives, in the same essential act of letting the day be done, and the night be night, and the body be heavy, and the mind be still. You are part of something very old and very large and very kind. Let it hold you. Let the snow-quiet village drift away now. Let the lane and the church tower and the elm trees and the frozen mill and the 20 chimneys and the 200 sleeping souls all drift gently into the background, becoming softer and more distant with each breath, like something seen through snow, like smoke rising and dissolving, like the last note of a round sung in a warm room that has been fading now for several minutes and has almost gone. Almost gone. Sleep well. Sleep deeply. You have been so patient and so present tonight, following her through her long December day, sitting with her at her fire, eating at her table, listening to Agnes's story in the 3-part round and the psalm that is still being sung. You have travelled 500 years and back again, and you are home now, in your own warm dark, and there is nothing left to do and nowhere left to go, and no one asking anything of you at all. Just sleep. Just rest. Just let the warmth find every part of you that is still holding on, and let it soften those places one by one until there is nothing left to hold and nothing left to let go of, and only the breathing remains. In and out. In and... Next time on Sleepy History with Alan, we travel to a different world entirely, and yet one that will feel, in its essential warmth, entirely familiar. We are going to Japan, to a small mountain village in the Edo period, the long, peaceful centuries of the Tokugawa shogunate, roughly the 1600s to the 1800s, when Japan was largely closed to the outside world and turned, in the most beautiful way, inward. We will follow a craftsman through the slow work of a winter day, the preparation of washi paper, made by hand from mulberry bark, in an unheated workshop beside a cold stream. We will sit with him through the particular discipline of cold weather craft. We will warm ourselves at his brazier. We will eat his simple meal. We will discover, I think, that patience looks the same in every language. That warmth is warmth, wherever it is made. Until then, good night from the village, good night from the lane, and the frozen mill pond, and the dark elm trees, and the 20 sleeping fires. Good night from her, our good wife, our unnamed, uncelebrated, entirely extraordinary woman, sleeping warm under her wool blanket in the close dark of her December loft. She doesn't know you are here, but I think, somehow, she would be glad.